The Human Realm. The Human Realm, by Liu Jiming. Translated by Chen Gang. Part 2, Chapter 1. Murong Chu felt that her daughter was like a drifting cloud, floating further and further away from her. Murong Chu's daughter, Lulu, was studying journalism at Renmin University. Every summer, she used her vacation to intern at news organizations, running around enthusiastically despite the sweltering heat. Seeing her daughter's face flushed and glistening with sweat from the scorching sun, Murong Chu's heart always ached. Lulu had aspired to be a journalist since childhood. In middle school, she joined a student reporter group and even won the title of Star Young Reporter. Reading her daughter's immature yet vibrant news articles, Murong Chu couldn't help but think of her own youth. In this regard, she thought, she takes after her mother. When Murong Chu was sent down to the countryside during the educated youth movement, she had served as a production brigade broadcaster for a time and written many news dispatches. She could be said to have some journalistic experience. So, when her daughter was filling out her college applications, Murong Chu agreed without hesitation to her applying for the journalism department. As dean of the sociology department at W University, a professor and a member of the Provincial Key Social Science Fund Project Review Committee, Murong Chu had just taken on a research project titled The Predicament and Way Forward for Chinese Rural Society After WTO Accession. She had originally planned to take her graduate students to the countryside for fieldwork last semester. However, because her elective course for undergraduates, Fei Xiaotong and 20th Century Rural China, had not yet concluded, and she had been plagued by a mess of trivial matters over the past 2 years: university housing allocation, her daughter's college entrance exams, and so on. The countryside trip had been repeatedly postponed. This time, Murong Chu was going to Beijing for a conference. She didn't inform Lulu beforehand, nor did she ask Lulu to pick her up at the train station. Instead, she went straight to Lulu's school and checked into a room at the on-campus guest house where she had stayed when dropping Lulu off at university 2 years ago. Just after setting down her luggage, dizzy from bumping along on the train all night and not even having time to freshen up, she dialed Lulu's dormitory number. Hearing her daughter's crisp voice and student-flavored Mandarin on the other end, a warm current surged uncontrollably from the depths of Murong Chu's heart. Since Lulu went to college, every time mother and daughter spoke on the phone, Murong Chu always reacted this way upon hearing her daughter's voice. From birth through kindergarten, primary school, and middle school, her daughter had never been separated from her. After Lulu left home for college in Beijing, for a long time Murong Chu felt empty inside, as if she had lost something. So, no matter how busy she was with work, she always found time to call her daughter once a week. And every time she heard that crisp voice on the other end, her heart would warm. But this time, Murong Chu controlled her emotions in time. She heard Lulu give an "oh," seemingly not reacting immediately, then exclaim in surprise, "Oh my, Mom, where are you?" Lulu's dormitory was very close to the guest house. In less than 15 minutes, the familiar peng-cha-cha disco-like footsteps sounded in the corridor. Immediately after, the unlatched door was pushed open with a whoosh like a hurricane. Before Lulu even entered the room, her voice arrived first. "Mom, when did you get here? You didn't even tell me to pick you up. You really scared me. Is this your idea of a surprise attack?" This time, Lulu spoke in Wuhan dialect, with the coquettish, pampered tone characteristic of Wuhan girls. Murong Chu watched her daughter walk in with a bulging school bag, her ponytail bouncing behind her head like a horsetail pine swaying. "Didn't I tell you? Mom came for a meeting and stopped by to see you." Seeing her daughter, a smile finally rippled across Murong Chu's originally tense face. She stood up from the sofa, just as she used to when waiting for Lulu to come home from school, took the bag from her shoulder, placed it on the coffee table beside the sofa, casually brushed off a few grains of sand from her clothes, and poured her a cup of warm water. "I don't believe it. If you're here for a meeting, why aren't you staying in a big hotel instead of this shabby guest house?" Lulu untied the scarf from her neck, glanced sideways at her mother, and pouted. "But Mom, if you have something to say, just say it." I don't have much time to keep you company. I'm preparing for the IELTS exam. This little clever ghost. Mom can't hide anything from her. Morong-chu reached out with both hands, pressed Lulu down to sit on the edge of the bed, and gazed at her daughter's nose tip, which was red from the wind like a dab of rouge. She tightened her face again, as if facing her students in a classroom, and said in a serious tone, "All right, Lulu, Mom won't beat around the bush with you. Tell me, if your dad and I arrange for you to go abroad, would you be willing?" Go abroad? I haven't even finished college yet. If I go abroad, it should be after I graduate, Lulu said with some surprise. Whose idea is this? Yours or Dad's? Or did you decide together? When did you two meet? She fired off a string of questions like a detective. Morong-chu remained silent. She really didn't know how to answer Lulu. Say her dad, Gu Chaoyang, was the mastermind, and she was just an accomplice? She certainly couldn't say that. Regarding the matter of her daughter going abroad, Gu Chaoyang had called her long distance several times, sometimes even from overseas, and each call lasted half an hour or even an hour. Gu Chaoyang, who was usually so impatient, showed exceptional patience, tirelessly explaining the significance, necessity, and implementation details of this matter until Morong-chu's ears grew calluses. She felt somewhat inclined to give in. Although she had never before considered sending her daughter abroad before finishing college, Gu Chaoyang's uncharacteristic persistence had shaken her somewhat. Despite her doubts, since our daughter was born and we divorced all these years ago, when has my ex-husband ever cared so much about her future? What's gotten into him? The prejudice against Gu Chaoyang formed over years of married life surfaced again, and she hesitated once more. Why don't you tell Lulu directly? Morong-chu threw the difficult problem back at him, but Gu Chaoyang saw through her little scheme with a businessman's shrewdness. Aren't you deliberately setting me up to be rejected? Lulu was raised by you. Doesn't she listen to you in everything, big or small? Even when having a meal with me in Beijing, she has to ask for your instructions. There was a hint of self-mockery and sarcasm in Gu Chaoyang's voice. At least you have some self-awareness. A trace of vengeful satisfaction swept through Morong-chu's heart. That time, after Lulu finished eating with Gu Chaoyang in Sanlitun, she called to report as soon as she returned to school. Gu Chaoyang brought me back an Apple laptop from the US this time. I didn't want it, but I really couldn't withstand his sugar-coated bullets. Besides, his female assistant was present, and they were so intimate, like lovers. I couldn't embarrass him. Lulu still called Gu Chaoyang by his full name, her words full of barbs, yet revealing the playfulness and coquettishness a daughter only shows to her father. But that woman is way too young, not much older than me. Those double eyelids are so fake. You can tell they were done at a glance. Lulu spoke like an informer, then changed the subject. Mom, Dad changes girlfriends like a revolving lantern. I can't even keep track. But your heart hasn't stirred till now. Never mind Grandpa and Grandma, even I'm getting worried. Tell me, what kind of man is this big professor looking for? Tomorrow I'll keep an eye out for you at our school. Maybe I can find myself a professor stepdad. Lulu was half joking, grinning cheekily, getting more and more outrageous. Morong-chu pretended to be angry, scolded her, and hung up the phone. At this moment, Morong-chu frowned slightly, pondering how to answer her daughter's question. After a while, she lifted her face and looked at her daughter with a gentle gaze, tinged with a melancholy unique to middle-aged women, but also harboring a wise and penetrating insight peculiar to a scholar long engaged in sociological research. Since childhood, Lulu had often encountered that strange gaze when her mother discussed academic issues at home with undergraduates or graduate students who came seeking advice. She had always been afraid to face this gaze. She always felt this wasn't the mom she knew who cared for her meticulously and loved her dearly, but rather a formidable woman with titles like professor and sociologist who had nothing to do with her. Although her mother rarely looked at her with such a gaze, she figured if it fell on her, it would be like an X-ray, illuminating every secret in her heart clearly. Lulu, what if I told you, Morong-chu said in a voice as soft as her gaze, that this was decided by your dad and me, together? Then I still don't want to go abroad, at least not now, Lulu answered very crisply. This surprised Murong-Chu somewhat. She had originally thought that as long as she agreed, Lulu wouldn't have any objections. How many young people nowadays dream of going abroad? She remembered the summer after the college entrance exam when she took Lulu traveling overseas. Gu Chaoyang happened to be returning from China to the Duke Company headquarters in Los Angeles for short-term training, and he had arranged the entire travel itinerary. That was Lulu's first time going abroad, and she had a wonderful time. But Murong-Chu couldn't help worrying about Lulu's exam results. If the exam goes wrong, once, returning to the hotel after visiting Universal Studios in Los Angeles, she carefully voiced her worry. If you don't do well, just come to the US for college. Lulu hadn't yet emerged from the excitement of touring Universal Studios and said casually, "Great! Coming to Los Angeles to study film production wouldn't be a bad choice." But before her voice faded, she rolled her eyes at her mother and pouted. "Mom, do you have so little confidence in me? I'm planning to go to Peking University, and you're already preparing a fallback for me. That's way too discouraging. By the way, Mom, I forgot to tell you. The School Student Association is openly recruiting student reporters to go to Newjung in Yunnan for interviews. I signed up." Lulu suddenly remembered something. "If I get accepted, I won't be able to go home to spend New Year with you this winter break." Is this the reason Lulu refuses to go abroad? Murong-Chu pondered while looking at her daughter. From the radiant look on Lulu's face when telling her this news, she could see how much her daughter loved her major. In middle school, Lulu had participated in Wuhan's Chukai Cup composition contest. In an essay titled My Ideal, she had made becoming an excellent journalist her life's dream. And now her daughter was obviously approaching her goals step by step. Murong-Chu suddenly felt that as a mother she couldn't let her daughter deviate from the course she had set for herself at this critical juncture. Lulu has grown up. I should respect her choice, she thought. Perhaps she should make this clear to Gu Chaoyang. "Mom," Lulu gently called out, rubbing the glass teacup in her hands, subconsciously avoiding Murong-Chu's gaze. Looking at Lulu so close at hand, she could touch that youthful face with faint acne and even see the fine down on it just by reaching out. Murong-Chu felt that her daughter was like a drifting cloud, floating further and further away from her. It seemed her daughter had really grown up. Lulu heard Murong-Chu's slight sigh. She quietly raised her face and happened to meet a gaze staring at her. This was a typical mother's gaze, containing a hidden, imperceptible sadness. Lulu caught it and also discovered that several deep wrinkles had appeared on her mother's forehead, unusually broad for a woman, as if just plowed by a plowshare or carved by a chisel. Before this, in Lulu's impression, her mother's forehead had always been so smooth and flat, almost as rounded as a young person's. A vague unease and guilt struck Lulu's heart, and she couldn't help calling out again, "Mom!" By this time, Murong-Chu had calmed her emotions. She used her fingers to tidy a lock of hair blowing onto her forehead and examined her daughter standing before her. That slightly bulging forehead, smooth and full like an apple, eyes dark and shining like pool water, a small straight nose bridge, and lips with flexible and playful lines that always seemed to hold a slight smile, along with that small mole by the corner of her mouth. Which part resembled herself, and which part resembled Gu Chaoyang? She couldn't say for the moment. She took Lulu's slender, small hands, like works of art, and patted them gently twice, seeming to comfort both her daughter and herself. A faint smile floated onto the corners of her mouth, painted with lipstick so light it was almost invisible. "By the way, Lulu, your dad is also coming to Beijing tomorrow," she said casually. "The three of us might have a meal together then. Do you have class tomorrow?" Facing her mother's inquiring gaze that treated her like an adult, Lulu nodded and gave a soft, Sensing her daughter's slight anxiety, Murong-Chu understood in her heart that Lulu was worried she and Gu Chaoyang would force her to go abroad. "Don't worry, Lulu." Murong-Chu let go of her daughter's hand and stood up. "We will handle this matter carefully. Mom will never force you to live a life you don't like. Is that okay, Lulu? After speaking, she patted the back of her daughter's hand gently and stood up. Chapter 2. He had originally thought that after being separated for so many years and both reaching middle age, his ex-wife wouldn't have such a big temper anymore. On this autumn morning in 2002, the smog that had lingered over Beijing for several days had almost completely dissipated. Although the buildings, trees, and lawns on both sides of the road were still gray, the sky overhead had finally torn off the thick veil that had been gloomy for days, exposing its original lofty, clean, and vast face, instantly bringing to mind the familiar idiom, crisp autumn air. Indeed, this was the autumn in Beijing that Murongqiu knew, tranquil, dry, and vast, as if standing in a boundless wilderness, making one want to sing aloud or gallop on horseback. Of course, the current Murongqiu had no such interest or impulse. From yesterday to today, her mind was as messy as a sandstorm, entirely occupied by the impending meeting with her ex-husband Gu Chaoyang. She hadn't even attended to revising and polishing the paper she was preparing to submit to the Sociology Annual Conference opening in 2 days. There were few people waiting at the bus stop. Murongqiu noticed that among them was a tall, fashionably dressed girl with a cold expression who looked like a model. She opened the scarf covering her face, revealing a beautiful face with heavy makeup. She felt that all of Beijing was like this face, carefully painted and decorated, somewhat exaggerated like a theatrical stage set. Behind the bus stop's modern-looking canopy, and on a high-rise building across the street, stood 2 newly erected billboards celebrating Beijing's successful Olympic bid, one small and one large. The small one was printed with the Olympic torch and the words, "Beijing welcomes you," in artistic calligraphy like dancing golden snakes. The large one showed a scene of male and female college students gathering at the China Millennium Monument, cheering and jumping, full of youthful vigor. That rushing, festive atmosphere reminded Murongqiu of a hot summer night a year ago. That day, she had returned home feeling somewhat tired after attending an academic seminar and went to sleep uncharacteristically before 11. She was awakened in the middle of the night by a shrill telephone ring. Just as she picked up the receiver, not fully awake yet, she heard Lulu speaking urgently. "Mom, are you asleep? Get up and turn on the TV." Lulu was almost shouting like giving an order. Murongqiu's heart skipped a beat, thinking something had happened, and asked nervously, "What's wrong?" Lulu giggled on the other end, beaming with joy. "Hey, Mom, you really don't know? Beijing's Olympic bid succeeded. Samaranch just announced it in Moscow. Listen, all of Beijing is boiling over. We're going to parade on the streets right away and go to the China Millennium Monument to celebrate." What a child, thinking it was some earth-shattering event. After putting down the phone, Murongqiu shook her head to herself and smiled. But after lying back in bed, she couldn't sleep no matter what. Imagining her daughter's ecstasy, a string deep in her heart seemed to be touched, faintly emitting waves of ethereal echoes. Back when she attended that sociology seminar held by the Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing, did she also have such high-spirited fanaticism and excitement? Or even earlier, when she was sent down to that village called Shenhuangzhou by the Jingjiang, turning out in full force with the people from the educated youth settlement, holding torches, shouting slogans with extreme excitement, parading on the winding river embankment. The raging torches were like dancing dragons, illuminating the dark winter night as bright as day, making noise until dawn. How young she was then, about Lulu's age, right? Murongqiu thought in a daze in the dark. The buzzing hum of the old air conditioner sounded like bees in her ears. For several days, the average temperature in Wuhan had been above 35 degrees Celsius. Sleeping at night, it was hot even with the air conditioner on maximum power. The windows and curtains were tightly sealed, so much so that at this moment, Murongqiu felt as if she were imprisoned in a large sealed box, unable to sense any sound from outside, isolated from the world with a feeling of suffocation. But she knew that if she opened the window now, she might also hear deafening cheers coming from the university dorms. Whether due to staying in the air conditioning or the sultry weather, Murong-chu felt a faint restlessness from deep inside. Youth, youth. She murmured a sentence like reciting a poem or sighing to herself, turned over in bed and fell asleep again. Murong-chu boarded a bus coming from Shijingshan. There were few passengers on the bus as well. She casually chose a window seat and sat down. Before she could adjust her sitting posture, the conductor walked over and tore off a ticket for her with a smile. This surprised Murong-chu somewhat. In her impression, passengers on Beijing buses took the initiative to approach the conductor to buy tickets. The conductor always sat majestically on that special seat next to the door, scanning the passengers in the car condescendingly and watchfully like a policeman, seemingly waiting specifically for a passenger to forget to buy a ticket or intentionally evade the fare so they could issue a fine. Passengers getting off held their tickets carefully in their hands, filing out of the narrow door like prisoners of war surrendering with white flags in a movie. Once, when Murong-chu got off the bus, the conductor suddenly reached out unexpectedly, grabbing the collar of a middle-aged man who looked like a villager in front of her like catching a thief, and shouted, "Where's your ticket?" The middle-aged man froze, shrank his shoulders, and said, "Oh, sorry, I forgot." He hurriedly fished in his pocket for money to buy a ticket. Buying now, but that plump female conductor sneered, "Buy! In your dreams! Pay the fine!" The middle-aged man was dumbfounded. "Fine? You didn't ask me to buy a ticket just now. I thought—" Before he finished, the female conductor glared at him and said impatiently, "You thought? You thought you were Chen Shitong, waiting for door-to-door service? Take a look in the mirror. Stop babbling and pay up." The middle-aged man's face turned the color of liver, and he paid the fine submissively, swallowing his anger. At this moment, looking at this young man with a crew cut, full of vitality, easily reminding one of the term angry youth that had been popular in the media for a while, handing the ticket to her with a smile, Murong-chu was truly somewhat flattered. When she handed the money to him, the young man even said thank you, politely and comically like a gentleman. It seems the quality of Beijing people has indeed improved compared to before. This is probably related to the Olympic bid, right? Thinking this, Murong-chu cast her gaze out the window. The street scene of Beijing in the autumn of 2002 was like a colorful wilderness, dazzling to the eyes. Murong-chu carelessly browsed the cityscape outside the window and found that she actually liked this city, which appeared both old-fashioned yet possessed the tolerance and vitality to embrace all rivers. Over these years, she came to Beijing almost every year or half-year, whether for meetings, business trips, or academic exchanges. But each time she would have new discoveries and feelings. A newly completed, magnificent large building, or an overpass like a soaring dragon, or... It was like admiring a wonderful calendar, turning one page, then another, feeling refreshed each time. This was also why Murong-chu preferred taking the bus to the subway or taxi. The special psychological feeling brought by the rapid flow and intersection of time and space experienced when browsing street scenes on a Beijing bus was something she couldn't experience in that central metropolis where she lived, where the pace of life was always so slow and rigid. In Beijing, it seemed fresh things greeted and stimulated you every day, making you unable to quiet down for a moment, like riding an express train, time rushing forward schwa-schwa and constantly accelerating, while your body, or age, squeezed by both time and space, leaned back, or began to age, as if trying to grab a solid object for support to adapt to this speed or find some sense of security. But your efforts were destined to be futile, and thus a huge panic would follow. Perhaps this was the reason Murong-chu had several opportunities to transfer to work in Beijing but gave them up in the end. With her character of liking tranquility and freedom, it seemed more appropriate to treat Beijing as a pure object of appreciation as a tourist. But was it really so? Murong-chu suddenly thought, if my marriage with Gu Chaoyang hadn't changed suddenly back then, would I have made up my mind to transfer to Beijing? No, impossible. Murong-chu immediately denied this sudden hypothesis in her heart and secretly frowned at this untimely thought. because she had sworn in her heart when breaking up with the man she was about to meet that she never wanted to see him again in this life. This is what the saying calls enemies on a narrow road, right? Thinking this, a face of a handsome man with an exceptionally straight nose bridge and a haughty smile on his sharp-cornered mouth, seeming always to be scrutinizing others, flashed in her mind. After getting off the bus, Murong Chu quietly tidied her clothes in a secluded spot in the roadside greenbelt. Before leaving the guest house, she had put on a little makeup, of course the kind of light makeup that didn't show traces easily. Her clothes were still the light blue trench coat she had brought from Wuhan, with a rose-colored turtleneck sweater she always liked underneath. The black leather handbag she carried was a souvenir from an academic conference. Except for that sweater, which could somewhat be seen as specially changed for this meeting with Gu Chaoyang, Murong Chu's outfit was actually not much different from her usual attire for academic and general social activities. Last night, as soon as Gu Chaoyang got off the plane, he called her, and they agreed to meet at the Old Summer Palace at 10 this morning. When Murong Chu arrived at the Old Summer Palace, it was 5 minutes past 10. She was satisfied with this timing, letting her ex-husband, who used to be self-centered and was now the Director General of Duke Company's China region, taste the flavor of waiting for someone in public was not excessive at all. There weren't many people visiting the Old Summer Palace. Without much effort, Murong Chu spotted the tall, middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes leaning his right arm on the half-open door of a Mercedes-Benz sedan and smoking among the crowd in the square in front of the gate. Needless to say, it was Gu Chaoyang. Murong Chu hesitated slightly, then walked toward the Mercedes. When she was still a dozen meters away, Gu Chaoyang also saw her. He hurriedly threw the cigarette butt into the car's ashtray, straightened his tie, and walked quickly to meet her. When they were less than 2 meters apart, like soldiers hearing a command, they stopped almost simultaneously and looked at each other. In an instant, Murong Chu felt time and air completely stagnate. The blood in her whole body rushed upward. Her heartbeat sped up, but her appearance looked surprisingly dignified, reserved, and calm, as if she were standing on a university podium. This might be where Murong Chu, the scholar, differed from ordinary women. In the end, it was Gu Chaoyang who broke the deadlock. "You're still so stubborn, Murong. Why didn't you let me drive to pick you up?" "Oh, I'm used to taking the bus," Murong Chu said lightly. "Really? I thought, now that you've become a famous professor, this old habit would have changed long ago," Gu Chaoyang said, a teasing smile Murong Chu used to know so well appearing at the corner of his mouth. This person is still so conceited, subjective, caustic, and full of superiority. Murong Chu thought. Even his appearance didn't look like that of a perfunctory entrepreneur, but rather like a dashing TV host. She scrutinized this man who had once lived with her for many years carelessly, seeming to try hard to find traces left by time on him. But what disappointed and confused her was that time seemed to have deliberately bypassed or spared this man. He didn't become bloated day by day like fermenting dough, like many men of this age. Compared to back then, he had gained a little weight, of course, but for a middle-aged man it was just right and necessary, adding a sense of substantial strength. He was still as handsome as a fir tree. Even the smile in his eyes and on his face was as aggressive and full of sun-like brightness and infectiousness, somewhat like a film star who had become popular in the last 2 years. And in the past, it was this temperament that had made Murong Chu both loath and fascinated, unable to extricate herself. A complex feeling welled up in Murong Chu's heart. Melancholy, resentment, jealousy, or still, she couldn't say clearly. "Murong, how many years has it been since we met?" A faint smile appeared at the corner of Gu Chaoyang's mouth. "If not for Lulu, you probably wouldn't meet me here today." Seeing Murong Chu had no interest in chatting, he stopped. "So, shall we walk in the garden or find a bar nearby to sit for a while?" There were several elegantly decorated bars and tea houses near the square, but Murong Chu didn't want to sit face-to-face with Gu Chaoyang in a place with an always somewhat ambiguous atmosphere. "Let's go into the garden," she said. "All right, please wait." Gu Chaoyang said, returning to the car, parking the Mercedes in the parking lot, and then walking toward the old summer palace with Murong Chu. There weren't many tourists in the garden, but it looked somewhat disorderly. Besides tourists, there were many worker-like people going in and out. Murong Chu had visited the old summer palace when she was studying in that sociology seminar before. The solemn, lonely, and empty feeling at that time left a very deep impression on her. Years later, the messy scene before her eyes exceeded her expectations. It's said that the old summer palace is to be rebuilt into a larger ruins park. Gu Chaoyang walked up from behind and introduced like a tour guide. Before long, they walked into the area of broken walls and ruins that often appeared in film and television footage. Both stopped simultaneously. It's time to get to the point, Murong Chu thought. She turned around, facing Gu Chaoyang, and said in as calm a tone as possible, "Old Gu, tell me the truth. Why did you suddenly propose sending Lulu abroad?" "What reason?" Gu Chaoyang froze. He avoided Murong Chu's penetrating gaze and said tactfully, "What other reason could there be? Domestic education is too terrible now. I'm worried Lulu will be ruined in this environment. It's better to study abroad earlier. It's that simple." "Is it really that simple?" Murong Chu stared unblinkingly, seeming to want to find a flaw in Gu Chaoyang's face. She pursed her lips tightly, showing the stubborn expression unique to discussing academic issues. "But have you thought about it? Lulu is now a sophomore in the journalism department. She loves her major and dreams of becoming an excellent journalist. If you suddenly make her go abroad and switch to studying some international trade major you mentioned, what will she think?" "The child is still young. What she thinks isn't important." Gu Chaoyang glanced at Murong Chu and said dismissively, "The key lies in whether you agree." "That doesn't sound like words from a foreign comprador," Murong Chu said sarcastically. "Americans respect others' choices the most, even their own children's." "Who are you calling a comprador?" Gu Chaoyang blushed slightly, turning his face away as if to assume an argumentative stance like before, but immediately realized something and shrugged. "Murong, why do I feel your thinking is still stuck in the past? Comprador, you just stopped short of calling me a traitor." He looked aggrieved. "I just want the child to receive a better education abroad. What's wrong with that? I've spent a relatively long time abroad these past few years, and perhaps know a bit more about the gap between Chinese and Western education than you do. Lulu is our child. I should also have a responsibility for her growth, shouldn't I?" There was a tone of heart-to-heart talk in Gu Chaoyang's words, but it was precisely these seemingly reasonable words that, like a match, instantly ignited the emotions Murong Chu had been trying hard to suppress in her heart. At this moment, Murong Chu was no longer the rational, calm scholar who always appeared in public, but just an ordinary woman with emotions and desires, concerned about her child. "Responsibility?" she sneered. "Gu Chaoyang, are you worthy of talking about responsibility in front of me? When I was raising the child painstakingly all these years, what were you doing? Carefree and unfettered? Or indulging in romance? Did you think about the child in those moments? How much do you know about Lulu's personality, hobbies, joys, and sorrows? Do you know what dishes she likes? What does she look like when she laughs? What does she look like when she cries? Do you know what she fears most? What she desires most? What she likes most? You know nothing. In the end, you wishfully and suddenly make a major life choice for her, and how high-sounding. But do you know if this will make her or ruin her? You definitely haven't thought about this, have you? You only think of yourself, never willing to think from others' perspectives, not even your daughter's. You were such an extremely selfish person in the past, and you still are now." Murong Chu's barrage of words left Gu Chaoyang no chance to defend himself. He had originally thought that, after being separated for so many years and both reaching middle age, his ex-wife wouldn't have such a big temper anymore. But Gu Chaoyang's judgment was obviously wrong, just as he had made a wrong estimate in the rapidly changing market. For a moment, He was even dazed by Murong Chu's bombardment of accusations, standing blankly in front of her, at a loss. But Gu Chaoyang was an extraordinary man after all. Even facing his knowledgeable and sharp-witted ex-wife, he had sufficient reasons to maintain confidence and that seemingly innate superiority. In the face of any attack, he never retreated or compromised. This was his consistent character. Years of business life had made this character firmer and more powerful. So, as soon as Murong Chu finished speaking, he seized the opportunity to speak. "Yes, Murong. I admit I had faults, including character flaws, but can this be blamed entirely on me? If you hadn't so stubbornly cut off all contact between me and you and Lulu, things might not be as you say. You don't know how much effort I spent striving for my responsibility as a father. After Lulu went to college, you never would tell me where she was studying. If I hadn't accidentally seen Lulu on a college student TV competition show, I might still not have known she was in college in Beijing. Murong, you were too heartless." Gu Chaoyang looked at Murong Chu and said in a sad tone, "You can hate me, detest me, even take revenge on me, but the daughter is innocent. Even if I brought regrets and misfortune to her life, you can't deprive a father of the right to make up for these regrets for his child forever." He paused, turned his back to Murong Chu, put his hands on the railing of the ruins, lowered his head and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I'm already 49, about to cross the threshold of 50. Neither of us is at the age to handle everything emotionally anymore, Murong." Gu Chaoyang's last sentence made Murong Chu's heart tremble slightly. She lifted her face and saw a shiny patch of scalp on the top of Gu Chaoyang's head exposed because he lowered it. That spot had been covered by carefully combed hair just now. This made Murong Chu suddenly realize that time had not spared Gu Chaoyang as she thought, but had climbed onto his proud head, once thick with black hair, just as ruthlessly and impartially. She felt the blood surging in her body recede and subside slowly, like ebbing seawater, and her agitated emotions gradually calmed. The old and new grudges lying across her heart like hard stones seemed to soften considerably. She even felt somewhat forgiving toward this man whose voice was also beginning to go hoarse. But in this instant, a certain corner of her memory, long sealed in dust, seemed to be suddenly illuminated by lightning. That woman with a vixen face, half naked, not even having time to buckle her bra strap, blocking her at the door of that dimly lit apartment, arms akimbo, cursing her like a shrew in a sharp Beijing accent. Gu Chaoyang, wearing only shorts, sitting on the messy edge of the bed as if nothing had happened, arms crossed, and she, travel-worn, just off the train, retreating step by step out the door, a travel bag containing the clay pot of chicken soup Gu Chaoyang usually liked falling from her hand to the ground, thick chicken soup splashing all over her, the shattered pot fragments rolling quang-dong in the stairwell like harsh percussion music. That sudden stimulation, weakness, and humiliation penetrating to the bone made her tremble all over. Murong Chu's lips tightened again, and the expression that had just begun to loosen became cold again. She closed her eyes, trying hard to suppress the emotions surging up again. When she opened her eyes again, she found two little girls who looked like twins, holding colorful balloons with Beijing and Olympics written on them, staring wide-eyed, curiously and doubtfully at her and Gu Chaoyang. Indeed, the current occasion and time were neither suitable for quarreling nor for discussion. Did I lose my composure a bit? Murong Chu asked herself in her heart, squeezed out a kind smile at the two little girls still staring at her, then habitually tidied the hair blown to her forehead by the wind with her fingers, and walked slowly forward along the path beside the ruins. When they walked out of the broken walls and ruins to a withered lawn, both their faces seemed to have calmed down. They walked silently, separated by a distance of fully 2 meters, looking like two strangers who didn't know each other. They were obviously both aware of this awkward atmosphere, but neither took the initiative to change it. Just as both were pondering in their hearts how to end this embarrassing situation, Murong Chu's cell phone rang. She took the phone out of her bag, and as soon as she put it to her ear, she she heard Lulu's crisp voice. "Mom, how was your talk? Didn't quarrel, did you?" He, a negotiation expert in the international trade arena and a professor eloquent on the university podium. The levels must be evenly matched, hard to distinguish the winner. I really should have gone to watch the fun. Her daughter's deliberately relaxed and playful tone was obviously meant to comfort her. Murong Chu felt a warm current surge through her. "Mom, I just got last semester's scholarship. No need for Gu Chaoyang to spend money. I'll treat you tonight. Let's go to the newly opened Xidan night market to eat malatang. How about it?" This child. Murong Chu gave a bitter smile secretly and said briefly, "You'd better save the scholarship for your interview travel expenses, Lulu. Mom has to prepare a speech for tomorrow's meeting tonight." And she hung up. Gu Chaoyang obviously heard Lulu's words and said, pretending to be relaxed, "Lulu wants to treat us to dinner tonight? Where did she get the money?" But Murong Chu didn't take the bait. Instead, she said expressionlessly, "Old Gu, I don't want to say anything else. Indeed, you and I are almost 50. What's the point of bringing up those things? I only hope that regarding going abroad, please don't interfere too much with Lulu's studies and her right to choose her lifestyle independently." Gu Chaoyang was silent for a moment, nodded, and finally compromised. "All right, I accept your opinion." He looked at Murong Chu with a suddenly strange expression and said, "However, Murong, a doubt has lingered in my heart for many years, and I have never found the answer. Now can you answer me?" "What question?" Murong Chu glanced at him. "In your heart, have you never forgotten that Ma Ke? Did you never love me, or rather care about me?" Murong Chu never expected Gu Chaoyang would suddenly ask this question, at such a time, in such a place, and so many years after they broke up. She was completely stunned, as if hit by an unexpected blow, somewhat breathless. After a long while, Murong Chu recovered her composure. She cast her gaze to another ruin of the old summer palace not far away. At this time, the slanting western sun illuminated the ruins mottled, as if coated with a thick layer of oil paint, giving a sense of extraordinary heaviness. "Didn't we say not to mention past things?" She turned her face, contrary to the intensity just now, and said in a nearly weak tone, "Everything that needed to be said has been said, old Gu. I should go." Hearing this, Gu Chaoyang shrugged, the corners of his mouth turning up, revealing a strange smile. Walking toward the gate of the old summer palace, the two remained silent. At the moment of parting, Gu Chaoyang suddenly seemed to remember something and said, "By the way, do you know a person named Ding Yuping?" "Ding Yuping? Is he the vice county head of Yanhe County?" Murong Chu said. "I remember. He did a part-time postgraduate degree with me before. What about him?" "It's like this. 2 years ago, he led a group to Beijing to attract investment and found me. Uncle Han Peng also called specially, saying he wanted to invite me to invest in Yanhe." Seeing Murong Chu was somewhat surprised, Gu Chaoyang said, "You know, Uncle Han and Ding Yuping's father Ding Changshui were both my father's old subordinates. When I was sent down to Heku, Ding Changshui took care of me a lot. Of course, my decision to invest in Yanhe wasn't to help them. I am a businessman. Business is business. Besides, after China joined the WTO, our company shifted its investment focus from Southeast Asia to the Chinese market. That project in Yanhe County is also just a part of the company's overall strategy." Murong Chu didn't speak, her expression looking somewhat drifting. Gu Chaoyang thought of what he just said, realized something, and fell silent. Chapter 3. Always quiet and the only woman from the south, Murong Chu effortlessly earned the beautiful name, a flower of Jiangnan. The annual meeting of the National Sociological Association was held at the Fragrant Hills Hotel this year. Because this year's conference focused on the world-renowned theme of China's accession to the WTO, it was larger than any previous session. In addition to the directors of the National Sociological Association and some well-known scholars in the sociology field, several economists, national condition research experts, and humanities scholars active in the country were specially invited, as well as experts who participated in the WTO negotiations from relevant departments such as the State Council's Commission for Restructuring the Economic System and the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation. It could be described as a gathering of stars, an unprecedented grand occasion. Mr. Fei Xiaotong, the titan of Chinese sociology and honorary president of the Sociological Association, who was recuperating elsewhere, even sent a warm congratulatory telegram specifically for the meeting. The meeting appeared exceptionally lively from the start, while also suggesting portents of a fierce debate that might erupt. This could be sensed from the subtle atmosphere of frequent private contacts and conversations among many attending scholars in their rooms the night before the meeting officially opened. Although many of the scholars attending the meeting were acquaintances, Murong Chu did not take the initiative to visit the rooms. Instead, several colleagues with whom she usually had close contact called to greet her. Apart from Murong Chu's reserved nature as a woman, this was mainly because she had spent all her energy dealing with her daughter Lulu's affairs in the 2 days since her arrival in Beijing. She wanted to be alone and quiet for a while, partly to adjust her still somewhat disordered mood, and partly to seize the time to reconsider certain viewpoints in the paper she submitted to the conference. As one of the few female scholars in sociology, Murong Chu was known for her particularly meticulous and serious approach to scholarship. Sharing a room with Murong Chu was a female editor from sociological research named Wu Yan. She had been the responsible editor for several of Murong Chu's papers and could be considered an old acquaintance. Wu Yan was from Jiangnan, the Jiangsu-Zhejiang region, about 10 years younger than Murong Chu, a 1985 graduate of Fudan University's sociology department. With a fair face and the petite figure of a Jiangnan woman, a Beijing accent mixed with the soft tones of the Wu dialect, and an enthusiastic, lively personality revealing the shrewdness peculiar to people from Jiangsu and Zhejiang, she was quite popular. Naturally, she became the most active participant and the most well-informed person at every annual meeting. Many sensitive news items spread like wildfire through her before being officially released. In previous meetings, Murong Chu had also shared a room with Wu Yan once. In her impression, apart from sleeping, Wu Yan seemed never to have stayed quietly in the room for 10 minutes, either visiting various rooms or holding the phone, chatting non-stop. Usually, whether meeting in person or on the phone, Wu Yan always called Murong Chu Big Sister. Except for being somewhat too flamboyant in personality, Murong Chu found this little woman, as Wu Yan often jokingly called herself, quite endearing. People doing editorial work were probably all like this, right? It wasn't until past 11 at night that Murong Chu finished reorganizing her paper. Feeling somewhat tired, she stood up from the desk, rubbed her rather dry eyes, and prepared to rest. At this time, Wu Yan returned to the room. Just as she sat on the bed opposite Murong Chu, she said in a tone of reporting huge news, "Big Sister Murong, do you know that He Wei also came to attend our meeting?" He Wei? Because the question was sudden, Murong Chu didn't react for a moment. Which He Wei? Which one could it be? The author of The Changes in Hejia Village. Wu Yan said, "He's so hot right now. In Beijing intellectual circles, wherever you turn, you run into people talking about this book. I heard a central leader asked his secretary to find it and read it, drew countless lines in it, and recommended it to relevant leaders for circulation. Just didn't give a comment, but that attitude is clear enough, isn't it? Some in academia evaluate this work as a major breakthrough and the third milestone in the research of rural issues in the field of Chinese sociology, even mentioning it in the same breath as Mao Zedong's report on an investigation of the peasant movement in Hunan and Mr. Fei's rural China and peasant life in China." Murong Chu gave a soft, "Oh," seeming somewhat surprised. Wu Yan didn't notice Murong Chu's reaction and continued on her own. "Of course, there are opposite evaluations too. Some think the author's assessment of the rural status quo is too pessimistic, seeing the trees but not the forest, a narrow conservatism and new left tone. These views mainly come from neoliberal theorists who admire Hayek's free market theory and advocate accelerating urbanization. However, in this little woman's humble opinion, this is indeed a work full of insight. Originally, the author sent part of the chapters to me, intending to publish them in the journal, but ultimately, because of some sensitive issues touched upon inside, they were temporarily withdrawn. She patted the knee of her wool skirt with infinite regret and leaned back exaggeratedly. Speaking of which, He Wei is my senior fellow student. We met at a small gathering when returning to our alma mater for the anniversary in '98. This is a person with quite a personality. Outwardly simple and modest, way like a farmer, but inwardly very lofty. Definitely not the mediocre kind who drifts with the tide in academia. This can be seen from his The Changes in Hejia Village. Is that so? Murong Chu blinked her eyelashes, looking at Wu Yan with interest. The weariness that had just come over her seemed to vanish. Murong Chu hadn't read The Changes in Hejia Village mentioned by Wu Yan. Of course, she knew the name He Wei long ago. And she also knew that The Changes in Hejia Village was a book attracting much attention in the sociology circle and even the entire ideological and cultural field recently. She had also read some excerpts and scattered review articles in newspapers and magazines, having a rough understanding of the book's basic content. Murong Chu was also quite interested in many of the descriptions and viewpoints therein, but because she hadn't read the whole book and hadn't fully formed her own understanding, it wasn't easy to express her views to others. In terms of academic approach, Murong Chu belonged to the typical academic school, emphasizing the study of the internal laws of sociology while relatively distancing herself from attention to and debate over some sensitive, hotly debated realist topics. This might be both her strength and her weakness. But as a highly practical social science, Murong Chu equally emphasized the positivism and investigation and research advocated by the Chicago School. In this regard, she inherited the tradition of Chinese rural social investigation pioneered by Lang Shuming, Fei Xiaotong, and Wu Wenzhao since the 1930s and 40s. In the eyes of many peers, she was also regarded as one of the faithful successors of this school. In fact, Murong Chu's dabbling in sociological research truly began after participating in that sociology seminar initiated and hosted by Fei Xiaotong himself in the mid-'80s. So she never expressed objection to this identification by the academic circle. However, the Chinese sociological circle after the 1990s no longer followed the pattern of the fieldwork school in the 80s. With the massive influx of Western cultural thought and the mutual dialogue and cross-disciplinary penetration, the sociology circle, which already had strong integration capabilities, found itself in an active state of clamor and diverse schools. From positivism to development social theory, then to the Frankfurt School and Weber's cultural critical theory, and so on, it was truly dazzling for a time. The rural sociology school, which had previously held an authoritative position, was repeatedly questioned and criticized by young scholars who had mastered Western modern theories and was even accused of being outdated. In this vein, Murong Chu seemed very out of the mainstream, feeling detached from the affair. But she knew clearly that she wasn't a radical methodologist, so she never blindly chased new trends, but she definitely didn't stand still either. On the contrary, she maintained an investigative interest in any new theory and viewpoint. She believed that no matter what school or method, only by fully absorbing fresh air and nutrients while standing firm could one avoid withering and radiate lasting vitality. Just like now, she developed a strong interest in Wu Yan's words. She suddenly had an urgent desire to find The Changes in Hejia Village and read it seriously immediately. Once this thought emerged from her mind, the words followed. "Xiao Wu, can you find a way to get me this book?" "After I talked for so long, you mean you haven't read it yet?" Wu Yan giggled. "Hey, I say, big sister, isn't He Wei here for the meeting? Why don't you just ask him for a signed copy directly?" "You want me to ask for a signed copy like a groupie?" Morong Chu was also amused by her idea. Xiao Wu, only you could think of that. That's something little girls do. What's wrong with that? I'm afraid you're just unwilling to put down the airs of a famous professor, Wu Yan joked, kicking off her leather shoes. Fine, I'll just give you the copy I bought with my own money. This little woman was actually planning to ask old he for a signed copy. After speaking, she made a face at Morong Chu and went into the bathroom barefoot to wash up. According to the schedule, in addition to the opening ceremony in the morning, a vice minister from the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation, Long, was invited to give a report on the WTO accession negotiations. Presiding over the opening ceremony was Professor Zhuang Dingxian of Peking University, Executive Vice President of the Sociological Annual Meeting and a famous sociologist. Professor Zhuang was a direct disciple of Mr. Fei Xiaotong. That sociology seminar in the mid-'80s was also directly hosted and lectured by him. He could be said to be Morong Chu's enlightenment teacher in the true sense of stepping into the field of sociology. Zhuang Dingxian, back then, was just emerging at 40, deeply inheriting Mr. Fei's academic true teachings, a prominent figure in the sociology circle. His thinking was active, and he was easygoing. Especially when lecturing, he spoke with a Sichuan accent, very fast, sounding humorous and witty, often throwing in a geilaozi, a Sichuan expression, making people burst into laughter. Some trainees didn't call him teacher Zhuang Dingxian, but Old Zhuang. Old Zhuang got along extremely well with everyone, more like a senior brother than a teacher. But this once spirited little man was now almost bald, becoming a little old man, and people began to call him Elder Zhuang frequently. Seeing Zhuang Dingxian reading Mr. Fei Xiaotong's congratulatory telegram in a slow and orderly tone on the rostrum from a distance in her seat, Morong Chu couldn't help feeling a wave of disorientation. The opening ceremony of an academic conference is always a formality, so it ended in less than an hour. The remaining 2+ hours of the morning were spent listening to Vice Minister Long's report. Vice Minister Long was the chief negotiator of the Chinese delegation for WTO accession and had been stationed at the WTO headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, for a long time. For many who wished to understand this historical event, his report was undoubtedly attractive. Not only all the representatives attending the meeting, but even most of the hotel staff came to listen. The conference hall, which was already relatively small, was packed, appearing overcrowded for a time. Vice Minister Long was not only a senior negotiation expert but also had talent in speech. He talked about a dry, trivial, fluctuating diplomatic negotiation that lasted for more than 10 years vividly and wonderfully, full of wit and humor, winning bursts of laughter from time to time. He obviously understood that he was not facing an ordinary audience, but a group of intellectually sharp academic elites. He knew what these people cared about most, so he didn't dwell too much on negotiation details, but gave a relatively detailed introduction and explanation of policy issues of interest to everyone. For example, in which areas China made concessions, the controversial clauses of the WTO agreement text after modification, and so on. Individual representatives even asked him several sensitive questions, some involving high-level national secrets, which were obviously unsuitable for disclosure before. But now that China's accession to the WTO is a foregone conclusion, I might as well reveal a thing or two to everyone, Vice Minister Long said readily when answering questions. We conceded too much on agricultural clauses, for example. In the short term, this will seriously damage the vital interests of the vast number of farmers. And in the long run, it is also extremely unfavorable to national interests. A gray-haired scholar sitting to Morong Chu's right frowned and whispered to a person on his left, appearing somewhat agitated. I have always believed that the WTO is a double-edged sword, with opportunities and risks coexisting. But for China to move toward modernization, this threshold cannot be bypassed. Like a train that has entered the fast lane, retreating is impossible. The person on the left waved his hand, seemingly disagreeing with the other's view. But isn't the price also too great? The gray-haired scholar grumbled, casting a worried glance at Murong-Chu, seemingly wanting to hear her opinion. Murong-Chu listened to their discussion while contemplating, but had no intention of joining in. Vice Minister Long's report ended. As Murong-Chu walked out of the conference hall with the crowd, she heard someone call her name at the door. Murong-Chu! Hearing that familiar Sichuan accent, she knew who it was. Murong-Chu turned her head and indeed saw Zhuang Dingxian carrying a briefcase, quickening his steps toward her. Murong, what are you up to? Didn't call when you arrived in Beijing. I thought you didn't come. Zhuang Dingxian greeted her warmly and loudly, seemingly unconcerned about everyone's gaze. That careless manner was simply worlds apart from the air he put on just now presiding over the meeting on the rostrum. Oh, Teacher Zhuang. Murong-Chu stopped and smiled slightly. For so many years, she had always respectfully called Zhuang Dingxian teacher, as in the seminar back then. The conference was imminent. I knew you were busy and didn't dare to disturb. She shook hands with Zhuang Dingxian. Because she didn't mean what she said, she blushed unconsciously after speaking. Even you keep me at a respectful distance. This shows I'm really old. Zhuang Dingxian patted his bald head, squinted at Murong-Chu, and laughed. However, Murong, you, a flower of Jiangnan, are still so young your graceful bearing remains. Hearing Zhuang Dingxian mention the nickname she had almost forgotten, Murong-Chu blushed again. Back in the seminar, there were very few female students. Always quiet and the only woman from the south, Murong-Chu effortlessly earned the beautiful name, a flower of Jiangnan. Even Mr. Fei knew, once when he came to give a report to the seminar, he smilingly called Murong-Chu's name in public, making her blush deeply. And Zhuang Dingxian, who served as the main lecturer of the seminar, seemed to appreciate and favor Murong-Chu exceptionally. After class, he often asked her to accompany him for a walk and chat on the lawn outside the classroom. When Zhuang Dingxian was persecuted along with Mr. Fei during the Cultural Revolution, his wife divorced him. After the Cultural Revolution, he was busy with his career and remained single. So although they chatted about nothing more than professional topics, it still caused speculation and discussion among classmates. In fact, Murong-Chu could also sense Zhuang Dingxian's good feelings toward her, but at that time her daughter Lulu was already 3 years old and in kindergarten. Moreover, she always regarded Zhuang Dingxian as an enthusiastic and respectable teacher and never thought of anything else. Therefore, after hearing those gossip, Murong-Chu, who always cherished her reputation, actively distanced herself from Zhuang Dingxian. Fortunately, Zhuang Dingxian didn't mind this. After Murong-Chu graduated from the seminar, he cared about her teaching and research as always. After he became the deputy director of the sociology department at Peking University, he once wanted to transfer her to Peking University. This made Murong-Chu feel a faint guilt, in addition to gratitude toward Zhuang Dingxian. She remembered that shortly after she divorced Gu Chaoyang, Zhuang Dingxian took the opportunity of a meeting in the south to make a special detour to Wuhan to see her once. That teacher-like and brother-like care was unforgettable to Murong-Chu to this day. However, at that time, Zhuang Dingxian had already formed a new family with a female editor from Peking University Press. Murong, I've seen the outline of the paper you submitted. Later, as they walked shoulder to shoulder toward the restaurant, Zhuang Dingxian put away his smile and said, Recently, I've been thinking about a question. For a long time, our sociology circle has been enthusiastic about the construction of methodology. Relatively speaking, we have neglected the investigation and research of major realistic issues, and this is precisely the result of deviating from the tradition of emphasizing social investigation pioneered by the older generation of scholars like Mr. Fei. I heard there is a book called The Changes in Hejia Village that is quite good, Murong-Chu interjected. But Zhuang Dingxian seemed not to hear, or heard, but deliberately changed the subject. The paper you submitted. Although I've only seen the outline, the argument is quite meaningful. Of course, many places still await your further thinking or investigation, but the issues involved are undoubtedly worthy of attention. Speaking of this, he seemed somewhat excited. The sociology circle, silent for a few years, is finally lively. So I really hope to hear your specific thoughts at this meeting. My considerations aren't very mature yet. I'd better listen to everyone else's. Murong-Chu hesitated. She had wanted to ask Zhuang Dingxian's opinion on the changes in Hejia village, but after hesitating, she held back. Finishing academic matters, Zhuang Dingxian sized up Murong-Chu and switched to a relaxed tone. You are still like a female Shu-Shu, keeping your talents hidden. Let 100 schools of thought contend. Let everyone express their own views. Can you only listen to others and not let others hear your brilliant views? At this point, he suddenly leaned close to Murong-Chu and lowered his voice. Murong, is your personal situation resolved? Still alone? This isn't good. While you're still young, hurry up, or shall I find someone for you in Beijing? Murong-Chu was somewhat embarrassed by Zhuang Dingxian's sudden question. She stared blankly at the 2 wisps of gray hair drooping on Zhuang Dingxian's bald forehead, not knowing how to answer for a moment. Fortunately, at this moment, they walked into the crowded restaurant. Seeing Wu Yan waving to her at a dining table from afar, she mumbled a vague excuse to Zhuang Dingxian and took the opportunity to slip away. Chapter 4. She sized up this young man who looked rebellious on the outside and couldn't help thinking of her daughter studying in the journalism department of Renmin University. In the afternoon, when Murong-Chu sat down in an inconspicuous seat in the conference hall, she realized that this annual meeting had only truly kicked off now. The first to give a keynote speech was the famous national condition research expert, Hu Anmin. He wore a checkered white shirt and a tie. His face was square with sharp edges, complexion dark, looking like a miner. His hair was short and hard, standing straight up like steel wires, looking quite sharp. In recent years, with a series of bold articles analyzing and criticizing China's political and economic system bluntly, with broad vision and heavy weight, he attracted much attention from domestic and foreign public opinion circles and was frequently invited to lecture abroad. It was said that he had recently been a visiting scholar at Harvard University in the U.S. and was invited to the meeting just 2 days after returning to China. The title of Hu Anmin's speech this time was China's WTO accession should prioritize benefits for 800 million farmers. As soon as he took the stage, he clearly stated his viewpoint, which fit his consistent style. The primary task after China joins the WTO is to improve the state's ability to manage the impact of social conflicts and coordinate social interests, so that all interest subjects in society, especially the vast number of farmers and vulnerable groups, benefit universally. Agriculture and farmer income issues have always been the core issues of China's development, and joining the WTO makes this biggest development issue in China even more prominent. China's rural population accounts for 2/3 of the total national population. This basic national condition is difficult to change in the short term. China's agricultural labor force is 100 times that of the United States, while the export value of U.S. agricultural products is 4 to 5 times that of China. The gap in per capita agricultural product export value between the two countries is even wider, between 400 and 500 times. Currently, China's agricultural product production capacity ranks among the top in the world, but supply is relatively surplus, and agricultural product prices are still 20% to 40% higher than international market prices. Even if China does not lower tariff rates on agricultural products, under the condition that international and domestic supply exceeds demand and prices continue to fall, China's agricultural products generally still lack competitiveness, and the possibility of farmers increasing agricultural income is becoming smaller and smaller. China opening its market to U.S. agricultural products does not mean just over 12 million farmers losing their jobs as people estimate, but that the surplus labor time of the existing nearly 400 million agricultural laborers will increase significantly. They won't take to the streets to become the openly unemployed, but the time spent sunning themselves on the street side will increase. This will become the world's largest waste and loss of labor resources. But how can Chinese farmers maximize benefits and minimize risks after joining the WTO? This is the problem we really need to face. Hu Anmin's speech, lasting over an hour, was eloquent and powerful. Especially the package of suggestions he proposed was like a stone stirring up 1,000 waves. As soon as his voice fell, the discussion below buzzed like bees. Some admired Hu Anmin's views endlessly, believing they hit the vital point of solving China's current agricultural problems. Others expressed disapproval, feeling Hu Anmin's ideas and package plan were purely wishful thinking, overly naive, and suspected of being lofty but impractical. Theoretical value greater than practical value. Until dinner, everyone's discussion had not subsided. But Hu Anmin's speech undoubtedly conveyed an important signal. Attention to agricultural issues would become a central topic of this annual meeting. This was confirmed again when Liu Guotao took the podium the next morning. Liu Guotao was also a high-profile figure rising in the fields of sociology and economics in recent years, famous for researching 3 rural issues. He was once named News Figure of the Year for 2 consecutive years by an influential weekly newspaper in the South. He was a few years older than Hu Anmin, wore gold-rimmed glasses for myopia, had a tall and thin figure, looked refined and steady. He spoke slowly, not as aggressive as the former, but the inner sharpness and spirit were obvious at a glance. The title of his speech was WTO and China's Agriculture, Rural Areas, and Farmers' Issues. Different from Hu Anmin's macro-analysis and forward-looking outlook, he seemed to pay more attention to empirical analysis and dissection of the 3 rural issues after WTO accession. Comparatively speaking, Liu Guotao's speech did not seem to cause as enthusiastic a response among the audience as Hu Anmin's. But his measured, well-founded pragmatic analysis of China's agricultural status quo, through listing a large amount of data and rich information, had an unquestionable persuasive power. At the same time, it led people's attention to a more detailed and rational level. This was obviously the fundamental difference between his and Hu Anmin's speeches, so the response not being enthusiastic enough was naturally not surprising. Throughout the process, Murong Chu listened very seriously. Like a university student, she buried her head in taking notes, occasionally drawing lines and adding a big question mark where she thought further thinking was needed, or resting her slender chin on the hand holding the pen, gazing from a distance at the speaker discoursing on the podium, while her thoughts obviously drifted to some secret place only she knew. Even back in the room at night, Murong Chu sat at the head of the bed, still reluctant to put down the notebook. Seeing her expression, Wu Yan glanced at her curiously. "Big sister, we've known each other for so long. I've never seen you so diligent. You are even more serious than listening to Mr. Fei's report. Did you get any inspiration from the speeches of those 2 big shots?" Murong Chu closed the notebook, smiled, and said nothing. For her, it wasn't really inspiration, but she was indeed touched. After all, many viewpoints proposed by Hu Anmin and Liu Guotao from their respective identities as national condition research expert and economist provided her with some information and ideas worth referencing, but she also felt a deficiency from another aspect. Can the real impact of a major event like WTO accession on China, including the 3 rural issues, be fully summarized merely through some economic data or systemic analysis and prediction? Murong Chu asked thoughtfully, seemingly asking Wu Yan, yet also asking herself. Of course not. The impact of WTO accession must be comprehensive, from economy, politics, culture to social structure and human quality, no less than a revolution, Wu Yan answered crisply. But isn't economic construction the center now? People are used to starting from the economy for all problems. Some say our government has also become a big company. People have become economic animals. Not to mention many sociologists have also become economists. Didn't you see the smug look of Hu Anmin and Liu Guotao? He, this is a complex problem. This little woman can't say much. Better wait to hear what He Wei says tomorrow morning. Maybe he will have some brilliant views. You trust him that much? Not trust. Do you think I really became a groupie? Wu Yan giggled again. He Wei is a sociologist after all, a veritable peer of ours. Plus, he's my senior fellow student. Believe it or not, we're one family. Speaking of this, she stared at Murong Chu and said mysteriously, Big sister, yesterday I saw the intimacy when Elder Zhuang spoke to you. I heard he pursued you before. Is that true? Hearing this, Murong Chu seemed somewhat angry and said, Xiao Wu, what nonsense are you talking about? She was not used to discussing her private life with others, especially in front of Wu Yan, who was much younger than her. Wu Yan knew she had spoken rashly. She stole an awkward glance at Murong Chu, whose expression had become cold, and slipped away quietly to visit other rooms like a child who had caused trouble. Originally, Murong Chu was arranged to speak after He Wei, but she insisted on declining to Zhuang Dingxian. This made He Wei the last one to give a keynote speech in the agenda of this annual meeting, having somewhat the flavor of a finale. He Wei was less than 1.65 meters tall, wearing a pair of old-fashioned black-rimmed glasses and a blue Mao suit that also looked outdated, with a pen inserted in the upper pocket. His hair was messy, appearance plain, even somewhat down and out. The whole person looked like a rural intellectual from the 1930s or 40s. When he walked to the podium, he seemed somewhat nervous, not even daring to lift his head, eyes staring at the table in front of him. His Mandarin was very non-standard, with a strong Jianghuai accent. He even stammered at the beginning, but slowly became fluent. Mr. Lu Xun said, Originally, there is no path on the ground. When many people walk, a path is formed. Actually, history is much the same. History originally neither exists nor doesn't exist. When someone writes it and many people read it, it becomes history. There is no innate, natural history in the world that transcends visual angles and does not shift with human will. Saying this involves two theoretical issues in historiography. One theoretical issue is that some simple so-called facts do not constitute history. For example, who died when, or an earthquake happened on such and such a date. Such facts looked at in isolation have little meaning. A running account record is not history. History is a kind of knowledge. Another theoretical issue is that different people write different histories. That history is written by the victors is a truth known to all, but not necessarily many people truly understand this point. Marx's thought that the economic base determines the superstructure and the saying that there is no love or hate without reason in the world are both related to the theory that different people write different histories. After such a long preamble, He Wei finally turned the topic to the changes in Hejia village. My humble work. The changes in Hejia village is also a kind of history. I am not a professionally trained historian. When writing the changes in Hejia village, I used interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary methods, using both anthropological methods and research results and theories of political economy. This book is not a historical work, but a sociological work. Let's say it's writing history for ordinary people. The main content of this book is written according to themes, each theme forming a chapter. These themes include land, water area and local politics, population and politics, living standards, rural health, rural education, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, reform, migrant work, changes and continuities in customs and habits, Hejia village and the outside world, etc. In my research on Hejia village, I also discovered a phenomenon that appears contradictory on the surface. That is, under the condition that the material living standards in the local countryside have improved much compared to the Mao Zedong era, both grassroots officials and ordinary people miss Mao Zedong very much. Regarding this phenomenon, liberal elites teach us that it is because rural people are feudal and ignorant. Farmers don't know what's good for them, don't know what freedom is, they need an emperor to be loyal to, etc., etc. Actually, the situation might be exactly the opposite. My research and my experience prove that so many radical and ignorant actions in the Cultural Revolution were neither invented by farmers nor followed by farmers. The people of Hejia village didn't dance the loyalty dance, nor did they do the morning request for instructions and evening report. Beating teachers was also done by the so-called educated people. Farmers were against it. Farmers were also sympathetic to the landlords and rich peasants in the village. They either didn't understand class struggle or passively resisted it. They respected the cadres and intellectuals sent down from the city very much. On the other hand, they also suffered a lot in the Mao Zedong era. For example, in the slack winter season, they were mobilized to engage in water conservancy construction. Their customs and habits were called feudal superstition and suppressed. Their family genealogies were burned. Their material living standards not only didn't improve much, but famine occurred during the Great Leap Forward. Then why do they miss Mao Zedong? Contrary to the elites, they don't feel they naturally deserve a good life. A good life is earned by hard labor. So they look at problems more comprehensively and respect objective facts more than the elites. For example, in the Mao Zedong era, the social status of many lower-class poor people improved, women's status improved, education levels improved, health levels improved, national consciousness improved, community consciousness improved, because the people's commune system made them know that people can organize life outside the family. Cultural consciousness improved. Zhuang Dingxian, sitting on the rostrum, was obviously somewhat impatient, yawning twice in a row and looking at his watch without scruples. But Hui didn't notice at all and continued. In the process of writing this book, what I felt deepest was that in the vast countryside, the vast number of farmers cannot represent themselves on the one hand and are not allowed to represent themselves on the other. This cannot and not allowed remain the basic content of rural social political consciousness and political process. But China's radical intellectuals and politicians eager to catch up are often confused by the superficial vigor of the reform or revolution they started, thinking China has stepped into a brand new era, a glorious era of reemergence. But when the superficial storm passes and the initial fever begins to cool, we often find we haven't stepped forward very far. Heavy history and hard reality are still there, forcing you to admit it. What surprises me even more is that in the past 30 years, some Chinese intellectuals have constantly imported new concepts, theories, and methods from the West, but what the people actually use are still old methods. When Hui finished his speech, he didn't win warm applause and discussion like Hu Anmin and Liu Guotao. Instead, there was a silence bordering on oppressive. Murong Chu was a bit puzzled by people's cold reaction. She felt that although Hui's speech focused on the experience of writing the changes in Hejia village, it actually touched upon some misunderstanding existing in current sociological research or the entire Chinese intellectual class. It seemed Wu Yan's evaluation of this person was not excessive. She really wanted to read that book, The Changes in Hejia Village, sooner. Thinking this, Murong Chu drew an exclamation mark in her notebook, thought for a moment, and added a big question mark. Because she pressed the pen too hard, she almost poked through the paper. The two symbols almost crossed together, looking strange, somewhat like a Picasso painting. In the free discussion in the afternoon, while Murong Chu was still pondering the topics Hui talked about in the morning, she was called upon by Zhuang Dingxian, who was presiding over the meeting. Murong Chu, don't always be silent. Let everyone hear your thoughts, too. Murong Chu knew she couldn't dodge it. She raised her head, pondered slightly, and said, "These 2 days, listening to the speeches of several people, I have many feelings. Although the theme of this annual meeting is WTO, I want to raise another question here. Does sociological research have certain defects or misunderstandings? Are we passively binding ourselves to the chariot of economics or even political science, and while ignoring or even abandoning our own stance, automatically cutting off efforts to accept other spiritual resources? For example, We are always used to analyzing and observing society with thinking modes like economics and market sociology, but hold an indifferent attitude toward philosophy, religion, humanities, etc. The result is that in our eyes, Chinese society only has systems and markets left, but we can't see the position of humans in it. Is such sociological research complete? Therefore, precisely based on this thinking, I gave up the plan to make a keynote speech. I want to reflect on the research of China's rural institutions that I have persisted in over these years. Murongchu's speech seemed to surprise Zhuang Dingxian. Having been silent for 2 days, Zhuang Dingxian probably didn't expect her not to mention a word about her own paper, but to raise a question seemingly irrelevant to the theme of this annual meeting. A cold silence appeared in the discussion. I support Professor Murongchu's view. He Wei coughed dryly and said slowly, Habermas regarded sociology and psychoanalysis as critical sciences, wanting to awaken people to liberate themselves from the ideology of worshipping social structure and social totality through the critical ability of sociology. In the final analysis, understanding critique and cultural critique are seen as the same thing. It both puts forward the requirement for total theoretical understanding and fundamentally denies the possibility of such understanding. Adorno believed that negative dialectics contains affirmative statements about false things, contains affirmative statements about the real relationship between man and nature and the historical process. The so-called value neutrality can also be viewed in this way. But what is the real situation of some neoliberals and mainstream sociological research in China? It has almost become the interpretative tool and even vassal of market economy theory and mainstream ideology, completely abandoning the critical stance and care for humans. And a sociological research lacking humanitarian sentiments and modern democratic spirit, apart from submitting indifferent, trivial assessment reports full of various data to the state ideology like flattery, its inner poverty and incompleteness can no longer support the moral power this discipline should possess. He Wei's speech made Zhuang Dingxian, who was presiding over the meeting, look somewhat unpleasant. Obviously, the sharp criticism of current Chinese sociological research by He Wei and Murongchu was hard for him to accept. Soon, someone began to refute this view tit for tat. Academic criticism should not presuppose a stance, and Professor He Wei's criticism of neoliberalism violates this basic principle, said a thin-faced man wearing glasses. First of all, I don't think there is a criticism where stance is vacated, He Wei immediately refuted. Otherwise, the saying, what is important is not the era the discourse tells, but the era telling the discoursee would not hold. The bespectacled man questioned aggressively. Then what is your stance? Probably because the man's questioning was too sharp, He Wei didn't answer immediately. People began to whisper to each other. A buzzing sound arose in the venue, and the atmosphere became somewhat tense. At this moment, a young man with long hair stood up from the back row and said, I am a representative attending the meeting as a non-voting delegate. May I speak? Zhuang Dingxian said, Of course. Please introduce yourself first. Okay, my name is Kwang Sibei, a teacher in the journalism department of Renmin University. The name Kwang Sibei was very familiar. Could it be Kwang Sibei, the author of the recently popular bestseller, Investigation of Peasants in County C? Not long ago, Murongchu had solemnly recommended this book to students in class, saying that the significance of Investigation of Peasants in County C lay not only in exposing the shocking 3 rural issues to the public for the first time, but also in arriving, starting from journalism and literature, accidentally at a depth sociology hadn't reached. At this moment, she sized up this young man who looked rebellious on the outside and couldn't help thinking of her daughter studying in the journalism department of Renmin University. Many people in the venue cast their eyes on Kwang Sibei in unison. I am not a sociologist, but I adopted sociological writing methods in the book Investigation of Peasants in County C. Some say, although this book is a reportage literary work, it is also a sociological work. I feel deeply honored. Kwang Sibei's tone carried a confidence unique to young people. I respect the status and influence of sociology, but I also agree with the views of Professors Murong Chu and He Wei just now. I feel our sociological research is indeed too heavily influenced by the West, emphasizing method over practice, barely scratching the surface of China's social reality, lacking nuanced understanding. In the process of writing Investigation of Peasants in County C, I deeply felt that the current crisis in China is first of all a rural crisis. So I shouted, "The countryside is truly poor, peasants are truly bitter, agriculture is truly dangerous." I think to solve the three rural issues, the most urgent thing is to reduce the burden on farmers. To put it bluntly, it is to abolish the agricultural tax. Only by lifting the heavy burden pressing on the vast number of farmers and reorganizing scattered farming households to meet the challenges of the market can there be a fundamental way out for our agriculture after joining the WTO. Murong Chu felt Kwang Sibei's words hit her heart like a heavy hammer. She applauded involuntarily. Then applause rang out like a tide. Zhuang Dingxian on the rostrum hesitated for a moment, then clapped his hands reluctantly twice. The last day of the meeting was, as usual, summary, closing ceremony, and the like. Lunch was a buffet. Murong Chu, who had a small appetite, finished eating in a short while. In the corridor returning to her room, Murong Chu was stopped by Zhuang Dingxian, who seemed to be waiting specially.
"You, Murong Chu, what are you up to? Making me look bad."
He put his hands on his hips, deliberately pulling a long face. Murong Chu knew he was referring to her speech yesterday, but pretended to be confused.
"What, didn't you let everyone express their own views? Can't stand a little different opinion?"
"I won't care about the sensationalism of those young people. I just don't quite understand why you, always reserved and calm, also joined in the excitement with that bookworm He Wei," Zhuang Dingxian said seriously. "Do you want to give up your research direction and start anew?" "Of course not." Murong Chu also became serious. "But some self-reflection is necessary, right?" "Oh, then I'm relieved," Zhuang Dingxian laughed heartily. "I'll reveal a piece of information to you in advance. We plan to select a batch of representative topics from the papers submitted to this annual meeting and include them in the National Key Social Science Research Projects. I preliminarily consider including your project, but it needs to be more closely linked to the big topic of WTO. Prepare for it when you go back." Speaking of this, he frowned as if remembering something and said in an advising tone, "Murong, don't echo He Wei in the future. It's not good for you." "Teacher Zhuang, what do you mean by this? How can normal academic discussion be called echoing?" Murong Chu froze. "I don't understand. Think about it yourself." Zhuang Dingxian smiled mysteriously, turned around and walked slowly toward the other end of the corridor. Just as Murong Chu returned to the room, Wu Yan walked in excitedly, holding 2 books in her hand, beaming with joy. "Big sister, I got the books you wanted. I didn't expect my senior to be so generous. He gave me 2 copies, both signed. Now I don't have to go home to get yours. Here, this is yours." Murong Chu took a brand new copy of The Changes in Hejia Village, opened the flyleaf and saw written neatly, "Ms. Murong Chu for correction, He Wei." "Then thank you and Mr. He Wei." She put down the book and intended to take a nap, but Wu Yan pulled her arm and said, "Don't sleep, big sister. The weather is nice today. Let me accompany you for a walk on the mountain." Wu Yan's words really reminded Murong Chu. The meeting was about to end. Just attending meetings these days and ignoring the beautiful scenery of fragrant hills right under her nose was indeed unjustifiable, so she walked out of the room with Wu Yan. Murong Chu had visited Fragrant Hills once when attending the sociology seminar more than 10 years ago. It was also autumn. The whole class of more than 20 people, plus Zhuang Dingxian, took a Wanshan brand minibus, standing or sitting, and drove into Fragrant Hills in half an hour. It was early autumn. The maple leaves all over the mountain turned red, like clusters of burning flames. A patch here, a clump there, layered, and extremely brilliant. How old were they then? In their 20s, the oldest only in their early 30s, in the prime of life. Suddenly placed from monotonous and boring study life into the embrace of this colorful nature, everyone's mood was exceptionally high. Some shouted at the quiet forest at the top of their lungs. Others sang Walking on the Ridge by Luo Dayu, which had just become popular on the mainland. At noon, everyone sat on the grass on the hillside and had a unique picnic with canned food, bread, and ham sausages they brought. After lunch, someone proposed asking Zhuang Dingxian to perform a program, which immediately received an enthusiastic response. Zhuang Dingxian was in high spirits that day and didn't decline. He improvised a recitation of Guo Xiaochuan's long poem, Autumn in Tuan Poan. Murong Chu and Wu Yan walked out of the hotel and soon entered the tree-lined mountain path. The air was dry and fresh, emanating the unique scent of Beijing's autumn. On both sides of the mountain slopes, the maple leaves were just as red and brilliant as they had been more than 10 years ago, like a richly colored traditional Chinese painting. Slightly different from the feeling more than 10 years ago, there seemed to be fewer tourists than before, appearing somewhat spacious and desolate. Hearing the rustling sound of her feet treading on fallen leaves, somehow a trace of melancholy suddenly swept through Murong Chu's heart. "Big sister, I have an idea. Please help me think it through, will you?" Wu Yan suddenly said in a rarely serious tone.
Go ahead. When have you ever been so polite with me?
Murong Chu said doubtfully. "I want to take advantage of the momentum from China's WTO accession and our conference to open an interview column in the journal, inviting relatively active sociologists in the country to discuss disciplinary construction and realistic problems facing Chinese society from their respective research perspectives. Since it's autumn now, the column could be called Autumn Interviews, and after completion, it could be compiled into a book for publication. What do you think?" That's not a bad idea," Murong Chu mused. "Xiao Wu, you're always so carefree. Who knew you had so many ideas?" "So you approve of my idea?" Wu Yan smiled shyly, pressing her lips together. "Then I'll make you the first interview subject. You won't refuse to support me, will you?"
Oh, that probably won't work.
Murong Chu shook her head, but immediately noticing her attitude was somewhat harsh, added, "I still want to sort through my own thinking carefully. You should find someone else first. As for me, put me further back, wait for a while before we talk about it, all right?" "Well, okay," Wu Yan said, then suddenly lowered her voice and said somewhat mysteriously, "When He Wei was signing the book just now, he asked me if you were still single." Murong Chu frowned imperceptibly but didn't speak. "You may not know, but He Wei's wife died several years ago, and he's been single ever since." Wu Yan didn't notice Murong Chu's expression and continued.
Big sister Murong, I can tell he's interested in you.
"Look at how you two echoed each other at the meeting today. You have so much common ground. And one is my senior fellow student, one is my big sister. Let me play matchmaker for you two." But Murong Chu, as if she hadn't heard, quickened her pace and walked ahead. As soon as the meeting ended, Murong Chu hurriedly rushed back to Wuhan. Before leaving, she called her daughter Lulu. She originally didn't want Lulu to see her off, but Lulu insisted on coming. At Beijing West Railway Station, Murong Chu saw her daughter appear before her carrying a net bag of fruit, her face flushed from hurrying, and a fine layer of sweat beading on her forehead. Murong Chu took out a handkerchief and affectionately wiped her daughter's face. "Didn't we agree you wouldn't come?" There was almost no one at the ticket checkpoint, and only about 10 minutes remained before the train's departure. Mother and daughter couldn't spare time for much talk and walked straight toward the platform. Before boarding, she took the net bag of fruit from Lulu's hand. "Lulu, regarding you wanting to go abroad, your dad and I have reached a consensus. We won't interfere. As long as it's a choice you make independently, we'll respect it. You're a college student now," she mentioned Kwang Si-bei casually. "By the way, is there a teacher named Kwang Si-bei in your department?" "Yes, Teacher Kwang's investigation of peasants in County C is really popular lately, but I heard there's a lot of controversy. Mom, do you know him?
Oh, no, I don't,
Murong-chu said. She had originally wanted to say she had met Kwang Sibei at the conference, but the words reached her lips and she swallowed them back. At this moment, the whistle blew. The train began to move. Murong-chu watched her daughter's still childish face gradually recede, and a faint melancholy rose again in her heart. Chapter 5. If it were autumn, the entire hillside would be dyed crimson by maple trees, layer upon layer, as if on fire. After returning from the Beijing conference, Murong-chu threw herself into intense teaching work. During this period, she also went to Wudang Mountain to participate in a provincial key social science project review meeting that lasted more than 20 days, only returning to Wuhan yesterday. It happened to be the weekend, which for Murong-chu was a rare, peaceful day. She spent the whole morning reading graduate theses. After lunch, according to her usual routine, she should have taken an afternoon nap, and after that, if there were no classes or other activities, she would enter her study to work. This was a habit she had formed over many years. But today, she reclined on the sofa and sat there for quite a while without moving. The room was unusually quiet. You could hear even a goose feather falling to the ground. A ray of light shining through the half-drawn curtains illuminated one side of her face, making her entire bearing appear somewhat weary and desolate. She maintained that posture, sitting there motionless, looking like a portrait photograph from some past era. Directly in her line of sight, hanging on the most prominent wall of the living room in a glass frame, was a large photograph. It was a picture of her and her daughter Lulu together, taken when they had just moved into that 2-bedroom apartment, when Lulu was still in elementary school. In the photo, she and Lulu were both wearing dresses, which made Murong-chu look much younger than now. Of course she was younger then, not yet 40, and Lulu was essentially still a child, her jet-black hair braided into 2 pigtails, standing high behind her head like a real little deer, her 2 bean-sprout-like arms tightly embracing Murong-chu's neck, her face tilted playfully toward the camera, smiling so brightly that she revealed a mouthful of pearl-white teeth, so much so that at this moment, as Murong-chu gazed at the photograph, she seemed to still hear her daughter's laughter, clear as a mountain spring. Murong-chu involuntarily stood up, walked to the frame, carefully took it down, and gently wiped the dust from it with a handkerchief. When she touched Lulu's face on the frame, she seemed to truly be caressing her daughter's face, her fingertips sensing a trace of faint warmth. Later, when Murong-chu rehung the frame on the wall, her heart felt somewhat empty. The scene of meeting with her daughter Lulu and ex-husband Gu Chaoyang in Beijing floated before her eyes like a movie. For the first time, a thought clearly emerged in her mind. Would Lulu really leave her? She was startled. All these years, she and her daughter had depended on each other for survival. For every year Lulu grew older, for every step she matured, how much of her own heart and blood had been absorbed. Her daughter had become an inseparable part of her life, like those orchids and cacti on the balcony that accompanied her morning and evening. No, Lulu was her entire life's support, her only one. She couldn't imagine a day when Lulu would leave her. No, that was impossible. She immediately denied this thought. But Lulu had already grown up, like a little bird flying out of its mother's nest. She had the right to fly freely under the broad sky, didn't she? As a mother, she had to accept this irresistible law. But the problem now was that Gu Chaoyang had already intervened in their mother-daughter life and was influencing her, controlling her. And this was precisely what had been making her restless recently, even intolerable. As if seeing an eagle suddenly attacking a bird that had just begun to fly, she almost instinctively wanted to protect her child from harm out of maternal instinct. In that instant, Gu Chaoyang became a true enemy in her eyes. But this enemy was the child's father. When she parted peacefully with Gu Chaoyang at the old summer palace, she had thought her daughter's matter was properly resolved, but now, facing alone this photograph of herself and her daughter, she realized things were perhaps far from that simple. At this moment, Murong Chu had actually fallen into an irrational state, even somewhat neurotic. This was a Murong Chu completely different from the calm and composed female sociologist who appeared in public, just an ordinary woman. Now, this woman could not extricate herself from this irrational state by her own strength. She felt an inexplicable fear, just like when her marriage with Gu Chaoyang had suddenly changed. Murong Chu was not someone who was overly particular about daily life, but she was definitely not careless either. Those familiar with her knew she loved cleanliness and simplicity, and she usually gave people an impression of dignity and elegance. Her home environment was even more so. Of course, as a woman, compared to those single men living alone, she was naturally more thorough and meticulous. This 3-bedroom, 2-living-room apartment that had been allocated not long ago had relatively simple furniture and furnishings, even appearing somewhat outdated, but it was tidily arranged, spotlessly clean, and perfectly orderly. The lotus-colored curtains were half drawn, making the indoor atmosphere even more tranquil and serene. Since Lulu went to Beijing for college, Murong Chu had tried to keep her solitary life as simple as possible. On the balcony outside the living room, she kept several pots of orchids and cacti, displaying the owner's taste and sensibility. Murong Chu had loved orchids and cacti since she was very young. Even back when she was an educated youth in the countryside, living in such cramped and crude collective dormitories, she still managed to find a few orchids or cactus plants to keep. In all the years since, no matter how harsh the living environment, she never abandoned this habit and hobby. Every time she returned from a business trip or conference elsewhere, the first thing Murong Chu did was tend to those pots of orchids and cacti. She felt they were like people, possessing spiritual essence, capable of mutual conversation, listening, and comfort. Each time she tended to them, the irritation, loneliness, and solitude in her heart would disappear like a passing wind, and she would become as calm as still water. Over time, these plants became part of Murong Chu's life, increasingly difficult to give up. When she divorced Gu Chaoyang, she left the Gu family's spacious house in a fit of anger, taking nothing, except for her 2 bookcases of books and several pots of plants. At that time, housing was tight, and Murong Chu, just an ordinary lecturer, was assigned a room of just over 10 square meters by the university, a genuine tube-shaped apartment building where cooking could only be done in the corridor, pitch black like a tunnel, without even a balcony, unable to see sunlight all day long, emanating a damp and gloomy smell. She moved in with Lulu, who was not yet 3 years old. After placing the bed and essential bookcase and desk, there wasn't even room for a dining table. Even so, Murong Chu made a place for those pots of orchids and cacti. Although she worried that Lulu bouncing around might hurt the plants, having people and flowers sharing one room created a unique charm. Later, she moved once more, and it wasn't until 2 years ago when she was finally assigned this apartment in Maple Garden that Murong Chu had someone specially make a flower stand with steel bars on the balcony outside the living room, making it much more convenient to grow flowers. This filled the house with an elegant scent like orchids. Every time her graduate students came in, they would be infected by this tranquil atmosphere, as if afraid to disturb it, unconsciously lowering their voices. In the afternoon, after Murong Chu woke from her nap and walked out the door, her spirits had improved considerably. The Maple Garden Professor's Building was located at the foot of a mountain, right next to a spacious and bright asphalt path. The trees on both sides of the road were tall and dense, their thick shade like a canopy. When pedestrians raised their heads, they couldn't see the sky at all. It appeared exceptionally quiet. The W University campus had numerous varieties of plants and flowers in myriad forms, like a huge botanical garden. If it were summer, with bird songs and insect chirping, the fragrance of flowers and trees floating endlessly, one would feel as if placed in a breathtakingly beautiful garden. But now it was already winter, the trees sparse, fallen leaves covering the ground. Every time Murong Chu returned from trips elsewhere and came back to such a setting, even the most restless mood would quickly calm, her entire body and mind becoming extraordinarily peaceful, She liked this feeling, or rather, she liked this kind of environment. When she was first admitted to W University and lived in the Osmanthus Garden student dormitory, every year in April and May when osmanthus flowers bloomed throughout the garden, their fragrance wafting on the way to and from classes, she would sometimes pluck a pure white, delicate osmanthus flower from a roadside tree to pin on her lapel, or bring it back to keep in a jar with some water. Every morning when she first opened her eyes, she could smell a rich osmanthus fragrance. University was a famous university with over 100 years of history, known as the premier institution in central China, ranking among the top 10 universities nationwide. In the 1950s, the ranking might have been even higher, reportedly second only to Peking University and Tsinghua. The reason for possessing such an eye-catching position, besides having produced many outstanding talents and many academic authorities whose reputations remained prominent, was probably also related to its first-class campus environment. W University bordered East Lake and was built against the mountains. Inside the campus, flowers and grass flourished, and ancient trees reached the sky. There were both Chinese classical carved beams and painted rafters and glazed tile towers, as well as Western Baroque and Gothic architecture, arranged in jagged layers, staggered and orderly. The entire campus layout was basically arranged according to the mountain topography and plant distribution into cherry garden, plum garden, osmanthus garden, and maple garden, surrounding the administration building and main athletic field like stars around the moon. Cherry Garden had the highest elevation and the most imposing architecture. The College of Science, the Old Library, and the Foreign Languages Department were all here. Several ancient, dignified, hybrid Chinese Western buildings were arranged along the mountain, each building connected by tall, arched doorways, like several stately, handsome men holding hands and standing shoulder to shoulder. Standing on the rooftop platform and gazing into the distance, the entire campus spread out completely before one's eyes. Pavilions and towers, flourishing trees, an atmosphere of natural harmony. Below the building, a cement road wound past, cherry trees lining the roadside with swaying branches, graceful and charming, extending for hundreds of meters. Every year in March and April when the cherry blossoms bloomed, the cherry trees on both sides of the road were adorned with white and red flowers like clusters of brilliant rosy clouds, attracting countless students to stop and linger. Over time, Cherry Garden became the most famous scenic attraction of W University and even of all Wuhan. Compared to the noisy, bustling, and renowned Cherry Garden, Maple Garden appeared much more desolate. Located in the northwest corner of the campus by East Lake, about a kilometer from the administration building, a winding path sloped across the hillside, connecting Maple Garden to the campus. On both sides of the path, thorns grew everywhere and miscellaneous trees flourished. One could often see small animals like wild rabbits and squirrels appearing. When Murong Chu first got into W University, every weekend she and her classmates would go to Maple Garden to play, walking through the woods, exploring mountain gullies, climbing trees to pick mulberries, eating until their mouths were scarlet red as if they had applied lipstick. When they had played enough and were tired, they would spread a few newspapers on a clearing in the woods, lie on them, look up at the brilliantly blue sky and the trees and wildflowers covering the slopes, feeling utterly content. At that time, Maple Garden was a desolate and remote wasteland. Deep in the woods, a few farmhouse courtyards were scattered about, and occasionally one could hear a few dog barks and rooster crows, reminding Murong Chu of those times she spent when she was sent down to the countryside. On the hillside, there were many kinds of trees: pine, fir, china fir, white birch, mulberry, chinaberry, and some low shrubs. The most numerous were maple trees, growing in patches, like a regular army with scale and organization. If it were autumn, the entire hillside would be dyed crimson by the maple trees, layer upon layer as if on fire. That passionate, vigorous color, like youth itself, had tremendous power to shock. A classmate from Beijing exclaimed in wonder, The red leaves in our W University maple garden are not at all inferior to those on Fragrant Hills. Since the graduate school moved here, dormitories, cafeterias, and academic lecture halls, new buildings sprouted up like bamboo shoots. Maple Garden gradually lost its former rustic charm and tranquility, gaining instead a unique vitality and energy characteristic of a university campus. 2 years ago, the university built several professors' buildings on the hillside not far from the graduate school office area. Murong Chu, who had just been promoted to professor, moved from the Plum Garden faculty dormitory to Maple Garden. Counting on her fingers, it had been exactly 20 years since she graduated from W University's sociology department and stayed on to teach. After graduating from W University's sociology department and staying on to work, for a long time, Murong Chu did not live on campus. At that time, she had just married Gu Chaoyang. After Gu Chaoyang graduated from W University's political science department, he was assigned to work in the Provincial Party Committee's Policy Research Office. Unlike most newlyweds, neither of them asked their work units for housing. Instead, they lived at Gu Chaoyang's family home. Gu Chaoyang's father had retired from a provincial-level leadership position. The whole family lived in the high-ranking cadre's residential area at Shuiguo Lake in Wuchang, with soldiers standing guard at the gate. They had a separate 2-story villa to themselves, its 4 sides covered with climbing plants like Boston ivy and morning glories. In front of the villa was a small courtyard planted with various flowers and plants. From afar, it looked like a green castle. Gu Chaoyang's older sister worked in Beijing, and several younger brothers and sisters mostly worked in other places too. His father suffered from diabetes and often went to Beijing's General Staff Hospital for treatment and recuperation, accompanied by Gu Chaoyang's mother staying for most of the year. So actually, only Gu Chaoyang and Murong Chu lived in the entire villa, empty and echoing. When she first stayed on at the university, there were few classes. When Gu Chaoyang went to work, only she remained alone in the villa, isolated. That oppressive feeling, Murong Chu really wasn't used to it. Later, after their daughter Lulu was born, she gradually adapted. If not for the subsequent marital upheaval, Murong Chu thought she would have spent her whole life in this unusually spacious yet suffocating environment. In the first few years after Murong Chu and Gu Chaoyang married, the two got along passably well. Usually, they each had their own work and didn't spend much time together. Except for one quarrel, their married life was basically harmonious. That was not long after they moved into the villa. Once, Gu Chaoyang accidentally discovered old photographs and a diary that Murong Chu had wrapped carefully in plastic among a stack of her books and journals. He suddenly flew into a rage at her. "You still can't forget him! Could it be that in your heart, I'll never measure up to that Jin Xunhua?" Gu Chaoyang stood with one hand on his hip like his general father shouting at Murong Chu. Especially when saying the 3 words Jin Xunhua, his handsome face was twisted by angry and contemptuous sneering. He insisted she burn them on the spot. But Murong Chu held her head high and firmly refused. Only out of defending her own dignity did she protest in a quiet voice. "You have no right to interfere with my past." Gu Chaoyang was completely enraged. He rushed out the door with those items and burned them in one fire. Murong Chu didn't try to stop him. Watching those things she had treasured for many years turn to ashes in an instant, emitting a burnt smell. Her whole body trembled uncontrollably like she had malaria. In that moment, she almost left that villa, but she controlled herself. She ultimately didn't have the courage to destroy her present life for the sake of the past. After all, she was a woman. She even forgave and understood Gu Chaoyang's almost mad action. Gu Chaoyang was that kind of proud and ambitious person. Combined with the innate sense of superiority from being born into a high-ranking cadre family, he refused to lag behind in anything. After serving 2 years in the army, he was recruited as a worker peasant soldier student to study at WC University. After graduation, he was smoothly assigned to the Provincial Party Committee Policy Research Office. In the first few years working there from W University, he was extremely hardworking, pouring almost all his energy into it. Several policy research reports he participated in writing were highly valued by provincial party committee leaders. Combined with his father's political background, he was quickly promoted to deputy section chief. If he had continued, his prospects were obviously limitless. But not long after, Gu Chaoyang lost interest in developing his official career and suddenly resigned to go to Beijing. At that time, Lulu had just turned 1 year old. In the following years, they lived apart in 2 places, with Murong Chu taking care of the child alone. Gu Chaoyang rarely came back even twice a year. During that period, Murong Chu not only neglected her own specialty, but also frequently missed university classes, almost becoming a housewife. After Lulu started kindergarten, Murong Chu's pressure lessened somewhat. Once, taking advantage of attending a conference in Beijing, she thought of how Gu Chaoyang especially liked authentic Wuhan-style clay pot chicken soup and deliberately simmered a pot to bring to Beijing when she set out. But Murong Chu never dreamed that when she knocked on Gu Chaoyang's apartment door in Zizhu Courtyard, she would see a beautiful woman with bare breasts who looked somewhat like the currently popular film star Liu Xiaoqing. No matter how one looked at it, that was the worst period in Murong Chu's life. When she moved into W University campus with her 3-year-old daughter Lulu, she felt a sense of relief. At this moment, Murong Chu walked on the spacious and somewhat desolate tree-lined path, those past events that had once broken her heart drifting through her mind, yet her heart was surprisingly calm. Not far from the Maple Garden Professors Building was the recently completed W University International Academic Exchange Center. This was a magnificent building integrating conferences, research institutes, hotels, and dining facilities. The courtyard wall decorated with glazed tiles, green belts as spacious as a soccer field, streamlined paths clean as if washed and spotless, and flower beds dotting the scene like mushrooms, all extremely modern. It was said to be built according to 5-star hotel standards. Adjacent to the Academic Exchange Center was the equally recently completed Humanities Building, donated by Hong Kong tycoon Run Shaw. The entire College of Humanities and Social Sciences had offices in this building, including the Sociology Department. Chapter 6. She really couldn't imagine how a person could climb step by step from electrical circuit repairman to the position of deputy party branch secretary. Monday morning, more than 15 minutes before work time, Murong Chu arrived early at her office. Both the Sociology Department and the Research Institute had just moved from the old college office building not long ago. This was Murong Chu's first day at work, and her steps were somewhat hesitant, as if she had gone the wrong way. The security guard in a brand new uniform was seeing Murong Chu for the first time and asked whom she was looking for. Murong Chu took out the key tag she had only received a few days ago. The security guard took it and examined it carefully. When returning it to Murong Chu, his expression was somewhat surprised. Opening the office door, a strong smell of paint rushed at her. Murong Chu choked and sneezed, quickly taking out a handkerchief to cover her mouth. At the same time, she looked at the empty corridor. Only her shadow projected on the clean tile floor. The silence was somewhat daunting. As soon as Murong Chu entered, she quickly opened all the windows and doors, letting fresh air thoroughly cleanse the paint-filled room. The office was unusually spacious, approximately over 30 square meters, fully double the size of Murong Chu's previous old office, and it was decorated according to the same specifications as the International Academic Exchange Center next door. From door frames, windowsills, ceiling, lighting fixtures, to office desk, bookcases, filing cabinets, and sofas, everything was quite particular. Even associate professors each have a separate office, 5-star standard. Even Peking University might not have such office conditions. This time we're really doing things in style. That day, when Party Branch Secretary Old Yue called to inform her about the new office allocation, he kept exclaiming, as if he were even more excited than if he himself had received a promotion. The room was very messy. Books, newspapers, documents, materials, including flower pots, photo albums, and some small decorations were all piled haphazardly. When the office moved, Murong Chu was at the Beijing conference, so her graduate students had helped. Young people worked efficiently, but they were somewhat rough. Murong Chu smiled bitterly to herself, rolled up her sleeves, and began organizing her office. When Murong Chu placed a pot of orchids on the marble windowsill, fine beads of sweat had unknowingly appeared on her forehead. She sat down in the high-backed leather swivel chair behind the office desk and looked around. The entire office had become neat, orderly, and refreshed. But after a moment of comfort and contentment, Murong Chu suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of discomfort. She felt that although such office conditions were good, as a scholar accustomed to quiet study and contemplation, she seemed to prefer staying in the previous cramped, dimly lit old office building. Moreover, this office desk was too large. "Is it necessary? I'm not a boss," she had once raised objections to old Yui. "In the entire department, only yours and mine are larger. You're the department head, I'm the branch secretary. There still needs to be some distinction from ordinary teachers and staff." Old Yue's reasoning sounded impeccable, leaving Murong Chu unable to refute, but she still felt something was wrong. Exactly what was wrong? For the moment, she couldn't figure it out. As soon as work time arrived, someone knocked on the door. It was little Q, the department's teaching clerk, holding a file folder, standing at the open door, smiling broadly at Murong Chu. "Teacher Murong, you're back?" Teachers and staff in both the department and institute called Murong Chu teacher. Previously, everyone called her director or institute head, but Murong Chu felt uncomfortable hearing it no matter what. After repeated reminders from her, everyone gradually adopted the current form of address. "Yes, I just came down from Wudang Mountain yesterday." Murong Chu nodded slightly at little Chu, her gaze falling on that stack of documents. "No wonder you have an immortal air about you," little Chu praised smoothly, simultaneously handing the documents to Murong Chu with both hands. Murong Chu didn't immediately flip through those documents. She had always had an almost instinctive aversion to these trivial administrative matters, but as department head, she couldn't escape them. This gave her a helpless feeling every time she saw these documents. A new round of professional title evaluation has begun. This semester's project applications plus provincial and central project quotas have been issued. Also, the orientation meeting for newly enrolled doctoral and master's students and their advisors will be held tomorrow. According to past practice, we need to invite university and college leaders to attend. Secretary Yue's intention is still for you to go invite them. Little Chu reported a long string of recent work priorities in one breath. Murong Chu listened patiently, then frowned. "These administrative matters, Secretary Yue can arrange them. I don't need to be involved." Little Chu blinked, as if she hadn't heard Murong Chu's words clearly, appearing somewhat bewildered. Actually, this was just her expedient measure of not knowing how to react to Murong Chu's words. Little Chu's father, Old Chu, before retiring was the deputy director of the university's academic affairs office, responsible for graduate student admissions. Murong Chu had known him since she was a student. Little Chu graduated from the university's adult education college with a junior college degree and was assigned to work in the department as a faculty child. Later, through self-study, she obtained an undergraduate diploma. Little Chu was plump, smiled at everyone showing a pair of cute dimples, was quite popular in the department, and always spoke as sweetly as if she had honey in her mouth. Although Little Chu was an honest and dutiful girl, she had considerable talent in handling interpersonal relationships. From leaders to ordinary staff, from professors to students, no one in the department disliked her. The only imperfection was that Little Q, already in her early 30s, still wasn't married. Many older colleagues and leaders in the department worried about her. Once, Murong Chu ran into Old Chu jogging on campus. The old man seriously asked her to look after his daughter. Could she find Little Chu a suitable match among the graduate students? At this moment, Murong Chu looked at the bewildered Little Q and realized her words were inappropriate. She picked up that stack of documents, casually flipped through them, and said, "All right, I'll discuss it with Secretary Yue later." After little Chu left, Morong Chu stared at that stack of documents blankly for a while. She noticed there were a few spots of dust on the corner edge of the office desk that she hadn't wiped clean earlier, so she pulled several sheets of scrap paper from the drawer and carefully wiped it again until the entire desk was polished like a mirror reflecting people's images before she stopped. At this moment, a middle-aged man wearing a light gray casual suit appeared at the office door. Before Morong Chu could greet him, he raised his voice.
Director Morong, sitting in such a bright and spacious office must feel different from before.
The person was Party Branch Secretary Old Yue.
What's so different? The room is just a bit bigger,
Morong Chu said seriously.
Plus, the light is too bright. I'm more accustomed to working in dimmer lighting.
You intellectuals! You got used to hardship before. Now when conditions suddenly improve, you can't adapt all at once. Not to be rude, but this is called being blessed without knowing it, Old Yue said with a smile, plopping down opposite Morong Chu. At the same time, he set down with a thud the military thermos he carried everywhere, right on the office desk. Because the lid wasn't screwed on tightly, tea water overflowed from the cup, dripping along the rim onto the desk. The desktop that Morong Chu had just polished to a shine was instantly stained by a large watermark. Morong Chu was pondering whether Old Yue's earlier remark contained more flattery or more sarcasm, so she didn't immediately get up to get a cloth to wipe the desk. But Old Yue moved quickly, lifting his own sleeve and wiping the wet desk clean in 2 or 3 strokes until it shone again. Morong Chu wasn't unfamiliar with Old Yue's rough gesture. Old Yue had been a soldier and carried the hard-working and practical spirit unique to military men. His personality was also quite forthright. Usually carefree, he liked to joke with everyone about harmless matters, making it hard to tell which of his words were true and which were false. However, at work he was precise and meticulous, absolutely unambiguous. When criticizing people, his dark and fierce face was quite scary. Little Q had been scolded by him to tears more than once. Did you see last semester's results for the college's project application funding ranking? Old Yui glanced at the stack of documents in front of Morong Chu. Chinese department first, journalism department second, philosophy department at the bottom, our department barely got third. Morong Chu gave an "oh," casually pulled out a form from that stack of documents, glanced at it carelessly without saying anything, and put it back on the desk. She didn't know when it started, but every semester the university conducted a ranking of teachers' project application funding. Not only were there various projects and academic research projects at ministerial, provincial, and university levels, but specific funding quotas were also issued, implemented down to each teacher and teaching and research group. Those who met or exceeded the target received bonuses. Those who didn't meet it had their semester bonuses deducted. Because whether project application funding met the target directly related to each staff member's income and professional title promotion and other vital interests, every end of semester, many teachers became as anxious as ants on a hot pot about projects, going everywhere to find connections, even neglecting normal teaching duties. Last year, our department ranked second. This year, we've slipped to third. If we keep slipping, we'll be dragging down the entire college. Old Yue frowned, his face full of gloom. The College of Humanities and Social Sciences was a stronghold among WA University's liberal arts colleges. In terms of faculty and research achievements, it had always occupied a pivotal position in the entire university. Among them, especially the Chinese department and sociology department stood out. Every time papers and project quotas were tallied, these 2 departments occupied the top 2 places. This time, second place was taken by the journalism department, which was indeed somewhat beyond Morong Chu's expectations. I heard that starting this semester, the university is going to link project funding quotas with each college and department's financial budget. Those who don't meet the target will have the university's operational funding to that department reduced, Old Yue said worriedly. This way, our days won't be easy.
This is simply absurd,
Morong Chu said angrily.
If this continues, what research will we do? We might as well all go into business.
Because of her anger, Murong-chu's face turned red. Old Yue had just been extremely worried, but seeing the usually gentle and graceful Professor Murong-chu so indignant, he was momentarily stunned, then immediately changed his attitude using a resigned tone. It's not just our university doing this. Now, which university in the whole country isn't the same? Schools compete with schools, departments with departments, teachers with teachers, students with students. It's survival of the fittest. Old Yue's words caused the fire that had risen in Murong-chu's heart to suddenly extinguish as if it had met a gust of wind. She stared blankly at the form in front of her, her mind going blank. Compete, then. In my view, we needn't lose heart. Given our department's strength, we won't really drag down the entire college. Old Yue looked at Murong-chu, weighing his words carefully. As long as we mobilize the teacher's potential, especially you as department head. Murong-chu felt Old Yue's words had hidden meaning. Old Yue, if you have something to say it directly. No need to beat around the bush. All right, I'll speak frankly then. Old Yue chuckled. You're a member of the Provincial Key Social Science Project Review Committee, holding the power of life and death over the entire province's social science projects. If you could give a little consideration to projects applied for by teachers in our department, wouldn't that— Before Old Yue finished, Murong-chu interrupted him. Old Yue, as a review committee member, I must be responsible to universities across the entire province. If I played such petty tricks, it would be too unfair to other universities. Murong-chu looked very serious, her words quite blunt. Old Yue's face alternated between red and white, appearing quite embarrassed. Seeing his expression, Murong-chu realized her words had been too harsh. After all, they were colleagues. Moreover, since they had been partnered together, their cooperation had been quite good. Usually, many things that should have been the department head's responsibility were handled by Old Yue because Murong-chu couldn't be bothered. Besides, Old Yue was also thinking of the department's work. No matter what, she couldn't embarrass him. Thinking this, Murong-chu felt somewhat guilty. Just then she noticed the water in Old Yue's cup was running low, so she stood up and took the cup. Let me add some hot water for you. Old Yue was obviously surprised by Murong-chu's gesture and didn't react immediately. When Murong-chu handed back the cup with added water, he almost felt honored, standing up and receiving it with both hands, saying thank you twice in succession. The two chatted about other work matters for a while, then Old Yue got up to leave. At the door, he remembered something and turned back. I heard the college is going to re-elect the dean. This time it's a real open election. As far as I know, you and Professor Xiao Lipping, the journalism department head, are the hottest candidates. At the door, he added one more sentence. If there's a vote, I'll definitely vote for you. The latter sentence had obvious flattering overtones. As the two administrative and professional leaders of the department, from any perspective, he actually had no need to flatter her. Murong-chu thought, finding Old Yue's words and actions truly incomprehensible. Actually, Murong-chu had known Old Yue from long ago. Back then, Old Yue was still called Little Yue, 2 years younger than Murong-chu. He had just transferred from the military to W University's logistics office, responsible for electrical circuit repair. Don't underestimate this university electrical circuit repairman position. In the early 1980s, not long after the resumption of the college entrance examination, universities had once again become a delicious morsel everyone wanted a bite of. For those young people who hadn't attended university, being able to work at a university, even as a cook or classroom cleaner, was desirable. For this goal, they would rack their brains finding connections and going through back doors without hesitation. Little Yue had served in the southwestern mountains, and his family wasn't local either. According to policy, he should have been demobilized and settled in his place of origin. Being able to transfer to work at W University was said to be thanks to his wife's influence. At that time, Little Yue's wife was a nurse at the W University hospital. It was said that when a certain university leader was hospitalized, he received meticulous and considerate care from Little Yue's wife. Even after discharge, the leader remained grateful, Because of this connection, little Yue avoided the fate of having to work in his mountainous hometown and, like a miracle, was assigned to W University's logistics office, becoming a glorious electrical circuit repairman. This was all what Murong-Chu heard directly from little Yue himself after they became acquainted. At that time, Murong-Chu was just a lecturer in the sociology department, having divorced Gu Chaoyang not long before. She lived alone with her daughter Lulu in a tube-shaped apartment building in the Lakeside faculty dormitory. Every day after class, she would hurriedly pedal her bicycle to the kindergarten to pick up Lulu, stopping by the market to buy some groceries on the way, then rushing home non-stop to cook. She wished she could split herself into two people. Lakeside faculty dormitory housed mainly single staff. Most married faculty had been assigned unit apartments in Plum Garden. Because Murong-Chu hadn't applied for housing allocation from the university when she married, after divorce, she had to reapply. Before being assigned an apartment, she could only transition at Lakeside for a while. The Lakeside housing was built in the 1970s. Crude construction aside, the electrical circuits and drains frequently malfunctioned. When they malfunctioned, either water flooded the corridor or the entire building went pitch black. If this happened on a summer evening with no water and no electricity, it truly felt like the world had ended in darkness. If you were even more unlucky and this happened while cooking, you could either starve all night or steel yourself to impose on friends and relatives. When there was really no other option, you had to call the university logistics office duty room and urgently send someone to repair the circuits. This was how Murong-Chu came to know electrical circuit repairman Little Yue. Little Yue's initial impression on her was that he worked efficiently, was professionally skilled, and had a good attitude, calling her teacher more sweetly than students did. In the hot weather, wearing thick work clothes, carrying a toolkit full of various electrical repair tools and holding a flashlight, he would look here and there in the pitch-black corridor, quickly finding and fixing the problem. That time, after Little Yue fixed the circuit, he specially came into the room to tell Murong-Chu, "Teacher, the electricity is restored. You can continue cooking." And he casually pulled the switch by the door. The room instantly became bright. Murong-Chu usually cooked with an electric stove. Because of the sudden power outage, the vegetables in the wok were only half-cooked when it stopped. Murong-Chu, her light restored, was truly grateful from the bottom of her heart to this electrical repairman before her. Seeing Little Yue covered in sweat all over his head and face, she quickly poured a bowl of cold water and handed it to him. Little Yue humbly said thank you, took it, raised his neck and drank it down without leaving a drop, then stood at attention with his legs together, his solid body ramrod straight. When he handed back the bowl with both hands, he said thank you again. His voice was loud and clear, speaking standard Mandarin. This gesture, this demeanor, revealed the martial spirit unique to military men. Murong-Chu couldn't help asking, "Were you a soldier?" Little Yue smiled, revealing 2 rows of neat white teeth. "Yes, how did you know, teacher?" Murong-Chu also smiled. "I guessed from your bearing." She had originally wanted to say that she had once dreamed of becoming a People's Liberation Army soldier, but somehow the words reached her lips and she swallowed them back. After that, whenever there was an electrical circuit malfunction, Murong-Chu would directly call Little Yue to come repair it. Coming and going, they became familiar. Little Yue was a warm-hearted person. Probably seeing that Murong-Chu had it hard raising a child alone once after repairing the circuit, he noticed she had very few coal briquettes left at her door. The next morning, without saying a word, he pulled a cartload from the university coal yard. After Murong-Chu moved into her newly assigned apartment, electrical circuit malfunctions rarely occurred. W University had complex organizational structures and numerous personnel. Not counting students, there were tens of thousands of faculties and staff alone. Plus, Murong-Chu's and Little Yue's respective professions and identities were so disparate that opportunities for them to meet naturally decreased. Over time, Murong-Chu gradually forgot about this warm-hearted electrical circuit repairman. Until a few years ago, when a deputy party branch secretary was suddenly transferred to the department, Murong-chu found the name somewhat familiar. When she saw the person, he also looked quite familiar, but she just couldn't remember. The other person recognized her at a glance. "Teacher Murong, do you remember me? Back then I repaired electrical circuits for you more than once." That somewhat humble teacher illuminated Murong-chu's mind like a flash of lightning. "Oh, little Yue, it's you." The other person quickly shook his head. "Not little anymore. Not little anymore. Little Yue has become old Yue." Murong-chu realized she had been somewhat abrupt and immediately corrected herself. "Sorry, Deputy Secretary Yue." For a while, every time Murong-chu encountered Deputy Secretary Yue in the department, her mind couldn't quite make the turn. She couldn't connect that little Yue from back then, with his white teeth and gestures revealing martial spirit, with the current old Yue, who had seriously balded, with only a few wisps of hair hanging sparsely behind his head, looking worldly wise. Moreover, the role contrast between electrical circuit repairman and deputy party branch secretary was too great. Beyond surprise, Murong-chu felt curious. With Murong-chu's life experience, she really couldn't imagine how a person could climb step by step from electrical circuit repairman to the position of deputy party branch secretary. At that time, Murong-chu was still the associate director of the sociology department, in charge of research and teaching. Her work didn't overlap much with old Yue's. But because of that curiosity, she paid more attention to old Yue, including private discussions among department faculty and staff. Whenever Deputy Secretary Yue was mentioned, she was quite interested. Gradually, she heard some rumors about old Yue, that old Yue's current position was entirely thanks to his wife. His wife had previously been just a nurse at the university hospital, somewhat attractive. Because she attached herself to a certain university leader, she rose from head nurse to hospital office director to vice president to president. As the saying goes, when the husband is honored, the wife is glorified. After old Yue's wife made it, she didn't forget to give her husband a boost. First, she transferred old Yue from his electrical circuit repairman position to sit in an office at the logistics department. Then step by step from deputy section chief, to logistics office infrastructure section chief, university office housing reform deputy director, and then to sociology department party branch secretary. With his wife's big tree behind him, he was bound to be promoted further in the future. Murong-chu usually never gossiped about people privately and never got involved in interpersonal disputes. Therefore, even though the rumors about old Yue were detailed and specific, she still didn't want to believe them, or at least didn't fully believe them. From her observation, old Yue was quite conscientious about work. He could be called a workaholic. He was usually the first to arrive at work and the last to leave the office, even frequently working overtime on holidays and evenings. Once, close to midnight, Murong-chu went to the office to get something and saw old Yue's office lights still on. Murong-chu passed by the door, saw it was open, and walked in, curiously asking, "Deputy Secretary Yue, it's so late and you're not resting? What are you busy with?" Old Yue was bent over writing something, his desk piled with books. Seeing Murong-chu enter, he politely stood up and said, somewhat embarrassed, "Oh, I'm doing an on-the-job graduate program at the education college. My thesis defense is coming up soon. I'm busy during the day with work, so I can only burn the midnight oil." Old Yue also had his methods in management. Although old Yue was only the deputy party branch secretary of the sociology department, because the secretary was in poor health and on long-term sick leave at home, old Yue was actually in charge of the department. Since he took office, the department's formerly lax atmosphere was completely swept away, and various assessment indicators that used to lag far behind other departments and colleges gradually caught up. Not only that, the treatment of all department faculty and staff had improved considerably compared to before. This latter point added considerable political achievement for old Yue. Even those staff members who had been most active in spreading rumors privately had to admit that old Yue still had real ability. Murong Chu also heard that to fight for more funding from the university for the sociology department, old Yue drank a whole gin of baijiu with the university finance office director and collapsed unconscious on the floor before even leaving the table. Because old Yue's work achievements in the sociology department were visible to all, everyone felt it was natural when he was soon promoted to party branch secretary, and those previous discussions about him gradually quieted down. After work, when Murong Chu returned home, before she even had time to change her shoes, someone knocked on the door. She thought it was a graduate student coming to discuss thesis matters, but when she turned to open the door, she saw a man about 40 years old with a broad face and large ears, hair combed without a strand out of place, solidly built, standing at the door with a bulging black briefcase tucked under his arm. As soon as he saw her, he bowed respectfully with somewhat exaggerated movements and called out, "Teacher Murong!" Murong Chu paused, then recognized the recently graduated on-the-job graduate student, Ding Yupeng. In Murong Chu's impression, this vice county head of Yanhei County frequently skipped classes, only conscientiously attending for a few days when exams approached. To pass the exams, he would make the rounds to each instructor's home, also bringing local specialties from Yanhei County and such, setting them on the host's coffee table, then opening his mouth to ask for advice about this and that. The meaning was obvious. He wanted you to leak a few exam questions. Probably no one could help it when facing such situations. After all, he was a vice county head, a local official who commanded respect below. Moreover, that graduate class was originally set up by the department to generate income. The fees were quite high, and most students in the class were party and government cadres at various levels who wanted to obtain a master's degree credential. Could you really be too strict with them? Even if Murong Chu herself could be that hard-hearted, other instructors might not be able to do it. Besides, she had been an educated youth in Yanhei County. In Ding Yupeng's words, that was her second hometown. "The fathers and elders of Yanhei County haven't forgotten you for a moment." Not giving him some consideration would probably be unjustifiable. So, each time Ding Yupeng passed exams smoothly. At graduation, Ding Yupeng, having obtained his degree, came specially to Murong Chu's door to express gratitude, full of ambition. He even had his driver carry in from the car a not inexpensive Yamaha stereo system and bring it into her home. Murong Chu was almost startled. The usual small local specialties were one thing, but receiving such an expensive gift. In all her years teaching at WO's university, this was the first time she had encountered this. She quickly stopped the driver who was about to put the item in the living room and, as if she had done something guilty, said with a red face to Ding Yupeng, "What are you doing? County head Ding." Ding Yupeng chuckled. "Teacher Murong, this is just a small token of a student's appreciation. Please don't refuse. To cultivate talent, you burn yourself like a candle to light others, dedicating yourself silently with painstaking effort. If I don't show some appreciation, I feel uneasy. Teacher Murong, rest assured this isn't bribery, and you're not accepting a bribe." This stereo system was decided by a collective vote at the county standing committee office meeting. "I represent 500,000 Yanhei County people expressing respect to you. Back then, you threw your beautiful youth into Yanhei County's broad world. Now you continue to contribute by training urgently needed talent for Yanhei County." Ding Yupeng spoke with certainty, impassioned, as if Murong Chu not accepting the gift would be letting down the people of Yanhei County. Murong Chu didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but still insisted on not accepting it. Ding Yupeng could only employ the 36 stratagems, with fleeing being the best. He left the stereo behind and made a quick escape with his driver. Murong Chu had no recourse. But for a long time, every time she saw that Yamaha stereo system placed in a corner of the living room, she felt as if a time bomb had been planted in her home, anxious and uneasy, unable to sleep well at night, constantly pondering how to return the stereo. When Lulu came home for summer vacation, she discovered it and was delighted, clamoring, I was just worrying about how to listen to the Beatles concert. This is like sending charcoal in snowy weather." As she spoke, she was about to unwrap the stereo's packaging, but Murong-Chu stopped her daughter, saying, "Lulu, don't touch it. If you want a stereo, Mom will buy you one." Lulu rolled her eyes at her and said, "Mom, look how serious you are. Don't you know, nowadays when people give gifts, they all give cash. What's a stereo?" Her tone suggested she understood more than her mother. Now, Murong-Chu looked at Ding Yupeng before her. What Gu Chaoyang had mentioned to her in Beijing flashed through her mind. She couldn't help thinking of the phrase, "One doesn't visit a temple without a purpose." She wondered, what business brought this vice county head here on this sudden visit? "Teacher Murong, to be honest, I really envy you university professors, sitting quietly at home, pursuing the scholarship you love, not needing to ask anyone for anything. Where's it like me, running around every day, burning incense and praying to Buddha everywhere? My legs are about to break." Ding Yupeng plopped down on the sofa with an envious sigh. "Back then, my father was most opposed to me going into politics, following his old path. He actually very much hoped I would become a teacher and pursue scholarship. Unfortunately, this son is untalented, disappointed the old man, and could only become a lowly 7th-rank sesame official." Ding Yupeng suddenly bringing up his father was somewhat unexpected for Murong-Chu. Ding Yupeng's father was named Ding Changshui, from Shanxi. In the early days after liberation, he followed the Liberation Army south to suppress bandits in western Hunan. It was said his leg injury came from attacking a pass occupied by bandits. When the bandit suppression troops returned triumphant, a group of cadres was left behind to assist local land reform. The leadership wanted to take care of this third-class disabled veteran and kept him in Yanhe County, located at the southwestern end of the Jianghan Plain, full of rivers and lakes everywhere, known as the land of fish and rice. Later, locals called this group of demobilized soldiers southbound cadres. In the early 1970s, when Murong-Chu went to Yanhe County as an educated youth, Ding Changshui was the Revolutionary Committee Director of Hekou People's Commune, where they were stationed. Back then, when their group of Wuhan educated youth, wearing big red flowers on their chests, rode in a Liberation brand open-top truck into Hekou, Ding Changshui led a group of middle school students in holding a grand welcome ceremony at the People's Square in the town center and delivered an enthusiastic speech. I, in his accent woe became E, answered Chairman Mao's call back then to take root in our Hekou and make revolution. In a flash, 20 years have passed, my hair is almost white. I dream every day that Chairman Mao will send us successors. I've been hoping for the stars and the moon, and finally you've arrived. Revolutionary young fighters. It hasn't been easy." His Shanxi accent, which had already changed somewhat, made everyone burst out laughing. Although Ding Changshui was quite strict with the sent-down youth in both political and daily life matters, and had a somewhat rough temper, when angry his thin, dark face turned as black as if scorched by gunpowder, recognizing no kin, quite frightening, he truly treated them as successors, caring for them meticulously and attentively. He often went down to various educated youth settlements to inquire after their well-being. Whenever the educated youth had any difficulties in life or conflicts with local commune members, he always stood firmly on the educated youth's side and patiently counseled those who held certain prejudices against them. If these city kids weren't for the revolutionary cause, would they come suffer hardship with us? Even if they have 1,000 faults or 10,000 wrongs, shouldn't we be more accommodating, right? In Murong-Chu's impression, Ding Changshui always had his collar open, an old, faded military uniform draped over his shoulders, rushing between the fields and ground of various brigades, supervising and directing production. When drought or flood disasters occurred, he would jump into waterlogged fields to personally participate in disaster relief. Once he almost drowned. Gu Chaoyang's father was Ding Changshui's old superior. Precisely because of this connection, Gu Chaoyang, less than 2 months after going to the Hekou commune countryside as an educated youth, was transferred to Hekou Middle School as a physical education teacher and half a year later joined the army. In the late 1970s, after the educated youth returned to the cities, quite a few people still spoke of Ding Changshui with nostalgia, all saying he was a rare good cadre, praising him as they would Zhao Yulu. At this moment, Murong Chu looked at Ding Yupeng, who appeared quite shrewd in both appearance and character, nothing like Ding Changshui, and asked probingly, "County Head Ding, your visit this time?" "Teacher Murong, you're busy, so I won't beat around the bush." Ding Yupeng leaned forward slightly on the sofa and said, "My visit this time, firstly, is to pay respects to my teacher. Secondly, there's this matter. Our country is about to join the WTO, and Yanhe County must also seize this rare development opportunity and catch up. So our County Party Committee Standing Committee passed a resolution to establish an expert advisory committee, mainly to provide policy consultation for Yanhe County's deepening reform and major decision-making. This also embodies the WTO principles of fairness, transparency, and democracy, preventing us from taking wrong turns. The expert advisory committee members will mainly consist of famous scholars and professors from inside and outside the province. We've invited Vice Governor Han to serve as chairman. Vice Governor Han has always cared about and supported Yanhe County's work. Moreover, his wife is from Yanhe County. Vice Governor Han is a son-in-law of Yanhe County people." He laughed twice at this point. "As for you, Teacher Murong, you were previously an educated youth in Yanhe County. You're an authority on researching rural social issues, and you're my teacher, Ding Yupeng's mentor. Asking you to serve as an advisory committee member is even more natural and right." Ding Yupeng was worthy of being a county head. His speech was both rousing and impeccable, so much so that after hearing it, Murong Chu wanted to decline but couldn't find a suitable reason. Otherwise, it would simply be treason. However, this matter did sound quite interesting, and moreover, it didn't conflict with Murong Chu's specialty. On the contrary, it would be quite beneficial for her to understand and observe rural society. But despite this, Murong Chu still didn't rashly agree. From her past experience contacting various county-level and even provincial and prefectural governments and cadres, many things were one thing when discussed, but another thing when actually done. There was often a great distance between the two. Seeing that Murong Chu showed no intention of refusing, Ding Yupeng naturally understood this as tacit consent. He cheerfully stood up from the sofa and said sincerely, "Teacher Murong, then I'll thank you on behalf of the people of Yanhe County. Next Saturday, we're holding the Expert Advisory Committee appointment ceremony at Hubei Hotel. I'll send a car to pick you up then. I still need to go invite Professor Wu from the Economics College. I won't disturb you further." Having said this, Ding Yupeng took his leave.